Greetings, folks. This is Jim Shearer,
Hey, Jim.
and this is World Computer Day. This is a big day to celebrate. So World Computer Day was founded because the Compuseum folks were inspired by Earth Day. My name is Jim Shearer, and we started the Compuseum as a nonprofit entity to celebrate computers and provide an educational outreach platform. And we created ENIACday.org website on the 75th anniversary of the ENIAC last year. We invited lots of folks from around the world. It was oversubscribed, so we turned ENIAC Day into ENIAC Week, if you can imagine that, and had events all throughout the week highlighting various people who had something to do with the ENIAC or just were interested. After it was over, we had a letdown moment. Sort of like when the New Year's Day is over the next day, when Christmas is over the next day, you have a letdown moment. And then we said, what do we do next? So naturally, somebody yells out, well, why not World Computer Day? There's a day for everything else. There's a day for Valentine's Day. There's a day for Take Your Child to Work Day. There's a day for everything now. Blow Your Nose Day. You wouldn't believe it. It's crazy. And we thought there's no way there isn't already a World Computer Day. And then what did we do? Googled it like you do everything. Google search this, Google search that, Google search this. It had not been done. There is a World Programmers Day. I've never been to it, but there's a World Computer Day now, and it's worldcomputerday.org. And it's our annual celebration. We picked a day that we thought would be a good day. That's the first day of the firing up of the ENIAC 75 years ago in February of 1946. So everybody liked the day. We built a website. That was a year ago. And then we said, well, what do we do on World Computer Day? And thankfully, we had amongst our ranks of Compuseum friends a man named Bill Mensch, and you all have heard of him. He's really our connection to the Silicon Valley of the East Coast, because he grew up in the East Coast, and he was on the foundational team of MOS Technologies. So we thought this is great. We thought of ourselves as Vacuum Tube Alley, but there's a little silicon in this valley. And it was at MOS, M-O-S, Metal Oxide Semiconductor Company. So that's the focus for this event. That's the theme for this year. Then we started running around to find people who cared about MOS Technologies and the 6502 chip. And lo and behold, we found lots of people that were fired up by the 6502. We found them all over the world, and some of them are on the call today. So we span east and west latitudes from Germany out to California. I'm not sure how many time zones it is. That's maybe 10 time zones. Maybe we have people here from Australia. They were threatening to jump in today. I'm not quite sure who got in here altogether, but here we are, World Computer Day. This is sponsored by the University City Science Center, which is in Center City, Philadelphia, and their special little venture cafe. I hope you brought a libation of choice, maybe a beer, maybe coffee, tea, who knows. I see we even include Sheffield, United Kingdom. That's very nice. DC, feel free to pop things in the chat box. I'll try to monitor that as we go. So this is quite a lineup. And it really did occur because there was infectious enthusiasm. This was easy to organize. I thought it would be harder. I wish it were bigger. I wish we had 1,000 participants. We're trending about 50. So I think that's a good number for a very verticalized project on the 6502 chip. It'll be recorded, so we'll be able to post it up on the website, worldcomputerday.org. That website will contain an archive, so year to year we'll keep all of these events in archive.
Recording in progress.
Got it. It's being recorded, recording in progress. So we'll be using the recording on the website. Likely it'll be on YouTube or a host server that'll keep it up there for decades. Fascinating people are here today. I'm honored to be part of this. My job is the Yenta to coordinate everybody as best I can. I'm not the expert, but I think we've done a good job to collect some experts who have enthusiasm for the topic of the 6502. My plan is to, in the first hour, have the speakers take 4 or 5 minutes to tell you what they're going to tell you in the second hour. So it's a little bit of an executive summary, 4 or 5 minutes. This is not a college lecture format. This is a chatting format. This is a celebration. So I'll call out each of their names. They'll talk for 4 or 5 minutes. And then maybe if it goes over, I'll kind of wave and say, let's give somebody else some time. But that should occupy about an hour. And then after that hour, those of you who are in the audience can choose who you want to cozy up to and whose room you want to go in, or also called a table or breakout room, so you can go see them. I was even thinking after the half hour of the second hour, maybe people could switch again and go in to see another room, meet somebody there. Personally, I want to be in every room. It's not going to happen, but I do know that each room will be recorded. So for days, and then over the weekend, I'll be looking at the pre-recorded or the recorded sessions.
Hey, Jim, how many?
Yes, we have a question. Go ahead.
How many speakers are there?
Bill, there are 9 speakers.
Cool.
Good question. Introducing Bill Mockley, son of Eniac. I like to call him.
I think he's my brother, actually, technically.
Brother of Eniac. All right, so this is a daunting challenge to kind of organize lots of intelligent people, but the website listed the order, the emails that I sent out to people listed the order. So I will go down that order, and if you're not here, for example, I'll see that happen and ask you that you change yourself from being unmuted or from being muted to unmuted as we go. So I will introduce the star of the show. Probably he needs no introduction. Bill Mensch, welcome to World Computer Day.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure being here. As it turns out, I enjoy answering people's questions more than just rambling on. But I will tell you a little bit about how we got it started. Chuck Peddle came to Motorola in 1973. I was there from 1971 working on various circuits and training program. And so when Chuck came to me, it was I'd say in the beginning of 1974. He had this idea of leaving Motorola with a team. And he came to me because he had seen me develop these PIA and different other circuits that I was involved with at the time. So when he and I went and met with the head of central research for Motorola, his name was Paul Barossa at the time. We met with him in his home, and that didn't work out. So then Chuck decided he was going to try to figure out where we could land. The reason why we were looking at leaving Motorola is because Motorola was going to move us all to Austin, Texas. And we didn't want to go to Texas. And so therefore, Chuck reached back into his previous relationships, that people that he knew, and he went back to, I think it was GE Day, and that's where John Pavenin worked together at GE Computer. And so then he called on John Pavenin, who he found at MOS Technologies. So it was kind of a random kind of a thing that we ended up at MOS Technology. And I don't know if it was our only choice, but I don't remember any other choice. So there we are. We're going to head off to MOS Technology. I never heard of them before, and Chuck only knew of them through John Provenance. But we lucked out because John Provenance put together a really good team that was, at the time, the leading independent calculator company in the world. And one of the people that were there, manufacturing people, Steve, anyhow, he came out of Texas Instruments. So they had a really good process. They had a really good mass shop. And there we were landing in what would have been a really out of the way place in Valley Forge Corporate Center outside of Norristown, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Bucks County, so I could drive probably about 45 minutes to where I grew up. And so for me, it was like returning home, which is just a wild card kind of a thing to think about, of all places that we'd end up. And so there was a team of us left, and there's a wonderful video that I'd highly recommend that Jennifer Holt, Winograd, I think is her last name now, but she's Terry Holt's daughter. Now, Terry Holt passed away last September, I think. And so she put that together, and she's the voiceover in that. And I'd highly recommend that particular video. It lasts a little over 5 minutes. It's at team6502.org. So that's the team of people that left Motorola. Sid Holt was someone we hired back there on the team. And then John Provenance had put together this wonderful company that had a mass shop. And that mass shop could turn around mass in days. At Motorola, it would take weeks. And so we could turn around mass for manufacturing very quickly. And so we also had that mass shop could do what they called spot knocking. That means that they could compare two masks or reticles and then make sure that if there's any light shining through it, they would block that out. So we had perfect reticles to make what was a proximity mask set. That means that we didn't touch the wafer. Motorola had actually contact masks, so that would reduce the yield. You use it one time and you start losing good die. So we could actually build our chips 10 times lower cost than what Motorola could do, at least 10 times. And so therefore, we just had a really good company that we landed on. And as a team, we knew what we wanted to do. We knew we were going to change the world. We didn't know how it was going to happen, but we knew that a low-cost microprocessor that had the instruction set that Chuck was a major contributor to, if not the one that was the sign-off guy on that. Will Mathis was the applications engineer out of Motorola. Chuck already had experience in small system design. Rod Orgel had already designed a couple of calculator chips. We had a very experienced team. The 6502 was actually the third, if you call it the 6501, 6502, it was actually the third microprocessor that Rod Orgel and myself had worked on and successfully completed. Olivetti CPU for the desktop. Motorola was working with the European calculator companies, and Intel was working with the Japanese calculator company. But anyhow, that gives you a little bit of the story, the background. I'd be happy to answer any questions in my breakout session. I could talk for hours on what happened during the exercise, during the actual development of the 6502. Also, I am still swinging for the fences. I'm still a design engineer. I'm still developing technology. I have here some plastic versions of the 6502. So when I left Motorola, when I left MOS Technology, I went to a consulting company in Scottsdale called Integrated Circuit Engineering. And that's where I learned a little bit about business. I've never taken a business course. So I started my own business because the other companies that I was working for whatever reason, didn't get it. And so then I thought, well, why don't I just start my own company? So I started that in 1978. My first day was May 26, 1978, designing calculator chips of all things for Jack Trammell. He wanted me to design calculator chips, which is kind of funny. And when I proposed the CMOS 6502, Chuck didn't want it, Jack didn't want it, nobody wanted it. And I thought, well, I'll design it anyway. It's a good idea. And so I have actually designed in every process, basically, that we have as mankind ever built. All kinds of MOS silicon and also actually ECL, emitter coupled logic. I designed a process for Motorola called emitter coupled logic. So anyhow, I have a vast experience, and not only as a technician, advanced research lab called Philco Ford there in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. That's where I got started, out of Temple University. So I have a lot of stories to tell. There's a lot of information on the website that you can just poke around, use my name, and you'll find a bunch of information there. And I also have 3 websites, westerndesignCenter.com, WDC65XX.com, and the Mensch Foundation.org. So I have a foundation for enriching computer science and engineering. So I'm highly involved. I work basically every day. I enjoy what I do. And so working on a weekend, I do that just because I enjoy what I do. And I don't have any other board members. I don't have any investors, never did. And so I can do what I want to do with the freedom of choice, anything I want to do. But it's always been around the 6502. And I could go on and on about what I'm involved with these days, which is all based upon microprocessing and embedded intelligence technology. So there you have it.
Bill, thank you very much. You know, we're all very grateful to you for keeping the 6502 number alive. There are lots more numbers. We'll be talking about all those numbers that kind of come out of everywhere and why the numbering scheme is the way it is. If you want to know who is speaking today, you can see it on the screen with a nice circuit board behind you. It lists Bill Mensch first, and then next is Liza Loop. Now, Liza Loop is an incredible person. She has not only lots of energy, but she is the recipient of Apple-1, #1. How does this happen? And how is it that she's here today? I don't know, but we're going to let her take the floor for the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, Liza.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thanks for putting this together. Bill, thanks for really introducing us to the chip. I'm at the other end of the spectrum because I'm not an engineer and I'm really not a technician. And when I started doing this stuff, I knew nothing about computers. The 2 characters behind me are me in an earlier incarnation and Steve Wozniak. And I met Woz at a Homebrew Computer Club meeting in 1975 or 6 or so. And I waved my hand and said, I'm at the Shearer session and said, I'm taking computers into schools. And Woz came and said, would you take this one into a school? So that's the basic story of the Apple-1. And I'll answer anybody's questions later. If you have more questions about that, I'm happy to tell stories. But I also subsequently worked at, I consulted for Apple, I consulted for Atari, because I wrote users manuals and I've remained a complete idiot user. I wrote the original reference manual for VisiCalc, because somebody has to be a bridge between you guys who are the really bright ones and the unwashed public who are the users who are taking advantage of what you do. So I've stayed positioned in that, and I can tell lots of social stories if you want to hear about the people that I have run into over the last 50 years. Fantastic folks. But if you ask me what's inside the 6502, I'll just draw a blank. Anyway, it's great to be here, and several of you I know, and I'm always glad to make new friends. Hi, Corey. Corey's gonna meet with us and put the Apple-1, which hasn't had electricity applied to it in probably 45 years. And he's gonna see if he can make it run. We keep putting it off because COVID says, no, you can't run a public event. But we'll get it done. We'll let you guys know when it happens. Unless you guys want more, I'll pass to the rest of us, so somebody else, so that we can all get our chance to have our 5 minutes in the spotlight.
Liza, thank you so much. You represent the West Coast, the California community. Thank you very much. I love the profile silhouettes in the background. Liza has quite a bit more to tell you, so jump on over to her room if you can. On the dais next is Laurie Walmsley. Laurie's going to talk to you about women and the 6502. The idea here is that they're going to tell you what they're going to tell you in about 4 or 5 minutes duration, and then you can go deeper with them one-on-one. Also, I encourage you, if you wish, because this is a networking event also, if you want people to reach to you afterwards and are comfortable putting your email address in the chat box, that's up to you. So now I turn it over to Laurie Walmsley. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a former software engineer, a former computer science professor, and now I write children's books, picture biographies of scientists and mathematicians. So like Liza, I am providing that bridge to people who may not be as technologically aware. And unlike most of the rest of the speakers here, I'm going to talk about people and not hardware and technology, concentrating on some of the people, some of the women who used the 6502 in its early days, and then maybe spreading out to just women in computing during those early years. Who knows? That's it. I'm done.
So tell them a little bit about the key women that you've discovered.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to be talking specifically about two people. Carol Shaw, who people say is the first female video game designer, but now there's a little bit of controversy about that. And then Sydney Ann Holt, who was a layout designer, even though she was not an engineer because she couldn't study engineering because she was a woman.
Okay, that's fabulous. So next is Corey Cohen, Vintage Computer 6502. Take it away, Corey.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Corey Cohen, and as Liza mentioned, I do a lot of work with Apple-1 computers in restoration and curation, as well as a lot of other different types of computers. I'm actually here today at the Vintage Computer Federation's museum in New Jersey. So my plan today is to kind of take everyone through a little tour of some 6502-based systems, give a little bit of discussion and history on them. I will also, hopefully, if it comes out, because I'm using my cell phone here, we can get in and to get a good close-up of our 6501, the close sibling to the 6502. We actually have a complete 6501 with the development kit and the original packaging as it was shipped from MOS with all the letters. So hopefully that comes out. And, that's pretty much what I'm going to cover today. We always invite people to come on down and see not just the 6502 machines, but pretty much everything we have. You can see we have everything from a Cray supercomputer to Univacs off of a battleship, or I should say a destroyer. We obviously have lots and lots of 6502 machines, and we have giant festivals we host around the States, and we get involved with ones all around the world in Europe and such. So we really like to promote people learning about the vintage computers. And obviously close to my heart, the 6502 is the one that I really push a lot because it's kind of what I grew up with.
Corey, thank you. Can you tell them what kind of 6502 machines you will show them?
So we've got everything from Apple-1 replicas. It's actually the replica that was used in a few movies. We redress it for different movies. So I know you're going to see some real Apple-1s, but it's kind of nice to see a stand-in from the movies. We also have an early Apple-2. We have other machines. We've got some of the, trying to do this without, see if I can come over and get over here. Well, obviously we're going to show Chem 1. We're going to show Challengers. There's quite a few machines we have. And, we'll even talk about some of the 6502 kind of variants, such as, the Apple III has a 6502 lettered variant, but there's also some other machines which have like some of the sort of 6502 plus some other stuff on a chip. I'm trying not to give too much away until we kind of walk around, because then I'll run out of things to talk about.
All right, Corey, thank you very much. Next is the famous or infamous Daniel Kottke. What was it like working with Woz and Jobs? Take it away.
Wait, I just want to know, where is Corey's museum?
Oh, funny, you've been here. So, Waltham,
Where?
New Jersey.
Oh,
At the
in Waltham,
InfoAge
Jersey.
Science
Oh, I
Yes,
see.
at the InfoAge Science Center. Yes. So we're down here. So yes, you've been here a few times.
I had a
So,
good
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm bummed that I missed the ENIAC day last year, but I guess there's a video somewhere. My story is I became friends with Steve Jobs at Reed College, which did not have any electronics to speak of at all. Barely, but they had a PDP-10. I never went to look at it, but Steve and I were friends in many topic areas, I'll say. And Steve and I went to India for 4 months in 1974, and I stayed in touch with him. And then I ended up going to Columbia. I was studying music and literature, and in the spring of 1976, Steve said he was doing a computer project. And I had met Woz. Woz came up to Reed College once, and I met him. But strangely, I never heard about the Blue Box project. Steve was very circumspect, wasn't talking about it. Anyway, so in June of '76, Steve was building these Apple-1 boards, and I said, "Well, do you need help?" Yes, he needed help. So he hired me for $3.25 an hour. First hourly employee. I didn't know anything about processors or integrated circuits, although I had taken Transistor Theory 101 at Columbia. So that was it. I had no idea how computers worked really, but I could test them. It wasn't hard. It was easy, actually. I assembled them, I plugged all the chips in and then tested them, and I had a good eye, and I couldn't follow a schematic, but anyway, Apple-1s, and then as I graduated Columbia in '77 and became the lead production technician for the Apple II. I was really good at fixing Apple IIs without still knowing how they worked, but I knew what the bad signals to look for, and I could swap chips. And then actually I learned electronics by being the engineering technician for the Apple III, working for Wendell Sander, the designer of the Apple III. And that was such a dream job. That lasted a year, 1979, 1980. I built all the prototypes of the Apple III. And then Steve Jobs was nice enough to hire me onto the Mac design team in 1981. Wasn't so nice to me in other aspects, but I was grateful to join that team. And so I became a design engineer on the Macintosh. And I don't know what else to say, but
well, there's a lot to say. Before you close on your intro, I do have a question. It is, how does a 65 chip go from Bill Mensch's office out to the work table of Daniel Kottke, Steve Jobs, and Steve Wozniak? I mean, was this a bus? Was this a truck? Was this an airline? Did you get it at a show? I mean, really, I'm serious. How did the chip get from East Coast to West Coast?
That was 100% Woz. And it was, as Bill Mensch tells the story, it was the WestCon show with 6502s for $25 in a jar. And Woz happened to be there and picked one up. And I didn't find out till many years later that Woz had already built a TV typewriter, which was the cover story of Nuts and Bolts magazine in 1975, I think. And I never heard Woz talk about that. I learned that. I was at the Computer History Museum standing in front of the TV typewriter. Don Lancaster, right, published a project about that. And I was standing next to Steve Innes, who's departed us, but Steve Innes was an early homebrew computer guy. Liza probably knew him. I'm standing next to Steve Innes, and he goes, yeah, Woz had one of those. He built one of his own. And because I had never been able to understand the Apple-1 schematic. And once you know that Woz started with the TV typewriter, that's the complicated part, is generating the video and the video buffer. And so then when he got his hands on a 6502, like within weeks, he had got that working. The 6502 just interfaced through the 6820 with the frame buffer on the Apple-1. So when the Apple-1 runs full speed, it's 30 characters a second. You get one character per frame. And anyway, that was the question. That's how. And then so Steve Jobs is the one who said, well, Woz, we should sell this. And they had already, previous years, they had already done the Blue Box project, doing phone phreaking with Captain Crunch. I can talk about that whole story, but I didn't know any of that at the time. Anyway, that's how the Apple-1 came to be. And Woz really did it just to show off with the computer at the Homebrew Computer Club.
Got it. Thank you, Daniel. We'll go now.
But then I just wanted to add the comment that, so I've been involved in many startups. I've been in the smart home field since 2015. But in 2016, I stopped going to Burning Man. And after all those years at Burning Man, I was in the habit of doing a project every August. And there must have been a good vintage computer festival that year. And so for my Burning Man project, I thought, why don't I build an Apple-1 replica? I was doing that a long time ago. I could do that again. So I'm still building Apple-1 replicas, and I've almost finishing a batch of 8. I haven't sold any of them yet. Finding video monitors was a big topic. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I'm happy to talk about that.
Daniel, thanks so much. So Cedric Godin up next in Lausanne, Switzerland, with the Rockwell AIM 65 computer topic. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I am Cedric Godin from Musée Bolo. It's Swiss Museum of Computer Science and Digital Culture and Video Games. And we have our exhibition in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And here I am in a special place in our main storage. As you can see behind me, there is a lot of computers, a lot of 6502. And I will mainly talk about Rockwell IM65 single board computer. Rockwell was really important for the 6502. It was second source. And if you look at today, the way you can obtain components, it's really difficult. And second source was really a good idea, even in 76 and 70s. So I will focus my talk on from technical point of view and historical also. And yes, on that side.
Good. You can talk a little more if you want. Why Lausanne? Why there?
So yeah, here the collection you see behind me started 26 years ago with an Apple-2 computer found on the street, and Yves Bolognini started to collect computers. He was a collector by Hurd, and one day he decided to collect computers. So on 26 years after, there is really a lot of computers here, some that are quite rare, some other less, but there is really a big collection. And one day we want to have a big space to show all this computer, but it's a long trip. So, and I am responsible now for the association that take care of this collection. It's all volunteer. We have no paid people, so we are all volunteer, and since the beginning.
Great. Well, I have been to the museum. It's excellent. I recommend you all go there if you're ever in the core of Switzerland for a trip to Lausanne. Our next speaker up is Al Charpentier, the 6502 Circuit Speeds man. And he's going to talk for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to tell us what he's going to tell us. And I see the ruby lift in the background. Is that right? You got to unmute yourself.
Mute. There you go.
There we go. This thing. Is that?
Yes, that's behind me on my right here. That's when Bill Mensch, let me introduce myself, Albert Charpentier. I joined MOS Technology right out of school, out of Penn in 1974. And I started working on calculator design chips. I joined the team who was designing calculator chips, which was the fundamental thing that MOS was developing at the time. And Bill Mensch mentioned that. And it really allowed them to develop really cutting edge technology on the math side. There was Walt Eisenhower who ran he was like the chief scientist for the fab. There was another guy, Don, and I can't remember Don's last name right now. He ran the math shop, which Bill has already mentioned was amazing that they could turn chips and masks and chips. Don, thank you. Thank you. I couldn't remember Don's last name. He was great. He was a tough man, but he could turn masks like nobody's business. So anyway, I was working on calculators, and I guess in like 75, 76, the team that from Chuck Peddle and Bill joined in MOS Technologies through Jump Haven, and it was an amazing wow when they came in, because I was designing calculators, and this was a whole nother world that they introduced me to. And it was fascinating to see that whole evolution happen, sort of working calculators. And I was really in the back end learning more, doing a lot of simulations. The simulations we had back then were done literally on a teletype machine. I mean, it was crazy back then. And and also we had a screen type of thing where you'd key in all essentially in Fortran, so you'd be able to get the waveforms and speed and stuff. And I was doing that. And but when the 6502 happened, that's really where I got my eyes opened, and I worked a little bit with a guy by the name of John May, who he was one of the guys who did the Kim 1, if you remember that, Bill. And then from there, I really got fascinated. And somebody else mentioned about Woz and the typewriter thing. I was fascinated with video. So I kept trying to figure out a way to use the 6502 in a video environment, because I love video games. I still love video games. So the biggest problem with video is the DMA process. And the 6502 had a wonderful feature. The fact is that it was a two-phase system. You had a phase 1 and a phase 2 clock. And it put the address out on phase 1, but it really didn't sync the data to phase 2. So phase 1 was essentially an open cycle. So I went, oh, I can use that cycle as a video DMA cycle area. So at that time, there's a lot of turmoil. Right about the time I wanted to do that was when Commodore bought MOS Technology. MOS Technology essentially got in financial trouble. And Alan Bradley, who was the original funder of that, decided they didn't want to fund it anymore. They didn't see a future in it. How crazy is that? But that's when all the turmoil happened and a lot of folks left. But I proposed to Jack Tramiel that I could do the video chip, which turned into the VIC-20. Okay, so that was the little bit of history of how that all happened. And then Chuck and I designed that chip, and we showed it to Jack, and then Chuck Peddle, then Jack showed it to Chuck, and then Chuck essentially put together this the VIC-20 out in California. I don't know, were you involved in that at all, Bill?
No, that was after my time. Oh, I thought you meant me.
Well, Bill and Bill, yeah, there's two Bills, right? Yeah, I don't think Bill, you would, that was right around the time you had left, right?
Right. So actually, what happened there is I just found out. Now I don't know. This is me hearing it from Michael Tomjet. That VIC-20, I think, was designed in Japan. And
well, actually, the real story of the whole thing is I designed the chip, and then a guy by the name of Bob Yanis. Okay, I was interviewing people because the engineering staff got so diminished. I was trying to hire people to come into MOS Technology, and he saw the VIC-20 or the video chip, and I'd done a little processor system with it. And he said, "Oh, I have a senior project to do. Can I do my senior project on that?" I said, "Sure, take it with you." And so he took it in Villanova and did a little senior science project with it, and made essentially a little typewriter type of project. And that's what we showed to Jack. And so eventually he then showed that to Chuck, and it was designed in California, but then all of the mechanics and everything else were done. I mean, the PCB design, and not design, but all the manufacturing was done in Japan. So the plastic, the PCB development, and all of that. But the actual design was done by the group that Chuck ran out in Palo Alto.
Bill Seiler?
Pardon?
Bill Seiler did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's the guy. He was one of the key guys involved in that project. Bill was. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then and that evolved then, and I wanted to, and then I did the next video chip, and then I did the 6510 microprocessor, so it would enable all the bank switching to happen. So it was a blast. That era of time. I was at MOS Commodore from 74 to 82. And there's a lot that happened then. It was a great time. And, Bill and Chuck take some real bows for setting that up and really enabling a lot of change in the world. It was a really fun time to be there, I have to say. So it was, I enjoyed it. And it was always my dream to make something that controlled a TV set. And I got a chance to do it at Commodore and MOS.
Well, thanks so much for giving that great overview. It's going to be difficult for me to know which room to go into. I'm supposed to have my own room, but if nobody shows up to my room, I got lots of options here where to go to.
Yeah, it was fun. The stuff between Bill and myself and Chuck and all there was a lot of debate about whether to do the VIC-20, how to do it, and so forth during that period. It was very interesting, and you
know that Chuck was not really interested in a home computer. Right?
No, he was not. He liked the PET process. He was going after the PET thing, right?
He was going after more of an industrial type of a computer. That's why the PET. He had RS-485 built into it, and
yes,
some other things that would be more on the industrial type of system. I proposed what actually I would say became the VIC-20. I proposed that in 1973 to Chuck, and he was dead set against that because we were designing the 6502. The idea was we were going to build controllers because you could control all kinds of things. And if you look at, I have it on my website, but the list of different things that were created from the use of the 6502, the 6502 enabled the broadest range of products of all types.
Oh, absolutely.
And like closed caption is an example. Closed caption was proposed by a company, I don't know if it was out of Ohio or where it was, but the company in Freiburg, Germany is the one that built the system for closed caption, which our Congress said every TV had to have closed caption for the hearing impaired. And so that's just one of example. The internet was actually first created, the packet switching with the 6502. Internet, what was it called? Telnet. Telnet was part of GTE, and actually I put some features in the 65C02 because Telnet wanted to use it for packet switching. Anyhow, so I could tell you all kinds of stories like that. But what's interesting, Al, what you were doing was I think Chuck just put up with you. I think there was something there that said you're being a rebel in wanting to build these small systems. And I think,
Well,
however
that
that
was-
fits together, I don't know how it fits together, but how you ended up making the memory efficient for doing small systems, and that the VIC and the audio and the video chips that you designed were.
Yeah, it was good too. I mean, like the whole process of learning about the 6502 and the I call it the condensed memory system and the very short cycle. Really, when the video chips and the audio chips that I've ultimately designed essentially were long word single instruction cycle machines.
Right.
Okay, which really architecturally were very similar to the 6502, just a longer instruction word, so that you would do a lot more with multiple ALUs and multipliers and such that would do all tasks at the same time to perform a task, whether it's digital filtering or video work or supplying a sprite to put on overlaying over top of the video background. So that was essentially that same architectural structure that was in the 6502. Eked its way into all my designs, which is nice.
Great, folks. I want to tell you that we're going to take 1 second here. I want to call out that there are 62 participants in this call, which is excellent. I've been monitoring where they're coming in from. I said Germany and as far east and as far west as California, but voila, we have someone here from Australia. His name is Alex Zaharov-Root. I'm going to have him do a shout out. I mean, really, he's come a long way. I don't know what time it is there, but he's going to tell us what time it's there and is it light or dark and what's going on. Alex.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's 7:53 in the morning, and it started at 7 a.m. So, but that's okay. It's. I mean, some of the planning meetings would have been 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I'm glad this was 3 p.m. Eastern time. And my first computer was an XD Sorcerer in 1979. I was 4.5 years old. But my second computer was an Apple-2. So, I love the 6502. And for Bill Mensch, I met you a few months ago. I've got to do a video interview with you for IT Wire and IT Wire TV. But look, I don't want to hold up any more of the presentation. So, greetings from Australia.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. So our next person up is Bill Hurd, designing with the 6502. Go ahead, Bill.
So my name's Bill Hurd. I like to refer to myself as a recovering Commodore engineer. It certainly was a wild time back in the 80s. And I joined MOS, actually, is where I started. And Al, your chair was still warm when I got there, as we say. So I was a licensed television repairman at the age of 18 in Indiana. There was just no technology around me. So a TV set was the only thing I was exposed to. And I moved out to Pennsylvania and I got a job at a company called Pennsylvania Scale Company as a technician, a lot like the gentleman spoke about fixing Apple-1. So I was fixing 6502 based instrumentation. And it's just a wonderful platform for instrumentation. So I learned engineering the correct way, how to do things where all the margins are met, all the temperature ranges are met, all that good stuff. And then I get a job at Commodore, at MOS. And my world changed. And I am a disciple of the 6502, and I'm a disciple of the VIC chip. Those were the two bus masters that ruled my life. And my life became how to keep making those live together at quantities of millions, right? So my first week there, I was hired as a technician at MOS, ended up, somebody dropped off a load of green and white paper and said, "You're now a programmer." And by the end of the week, I was in charge of the hardware for what we called TED, which went on to become the +4 series of computers. So I learned how to do everything it took to get MOS, CBM, Commodore, to make a computer all the way. I learned Japanese. I mean, all the things to, spent time in Japan learning the high quantity manufacturing, and just became a child of Commodore, child of the Jack Tramiel environment. So what I'm going to do today is talk about, actually, I want to be an Al's meeting because I have a feeling we're going to be talking about the same things, so timing, how to live and care and feeding of your 6502, which the VIC chip made possible in our environment with the television set, NTSC, I'm still amazed that you got NTSC to work out, especially, I think you were quoted as saying it's just dirty sand anyways, or somebody got quoted saying that. So
that's true.
Yeah. Didn't you, what you said about like DMA in your later life and stuff, didn't you do that in Sonic? Weren't you doing sound pointer fetches instead of sprite?
I created a living off of doing that with the DMA structure,
right?
That alternate phase DMA structure, because back then that was a simple way to manage it, because you get a multiple things share memory without doing any conflict negotiation.
Right.
And in the early days, that was an easy solution. The memory wasn't fast enough to be able to do that kind of conflict negotiation.
Yeah. So it was wonderful. Yeah. It was like laying right there. Use the lower fee for something else.
Right.
And you can get everything done at the upper edge.
Yeah. So, as long as the memory's fast enough, you were okay with that, and it just had to be twice as fast. So it worked out beautifully.
and that where I probably became an expert in a subject was DRAMs and the timings. I went on, I designed the Commodore 128. So I used the VIC chip. We sold 6 to 7 million of them. And so, yeah, it was an exciting time to be doing all that stuff. Nowadays, I'm an owner of a consulting group. I'm still a hardware engineer sometimes. I also do high-end network architecture. It's all the same anyways. And I just so I have a website, c128.com, hurdware.com, nice play on my last name. And also, I co-authored a book this year called Back into the Storm. It's about the 1980s designing computers at Commodore with Margaret Morabito from the old Run magazine. And Al, you and I were talking earlier, there's a tribute to Dave DiOrio in the back of the book, as he was just one of my best friends and a good engineer. So that's pretty much it for me. Again, I think we should combine Al's and my, and because we did that as engineers, there was the chip guy on the chip looking out through the pin. And as an engineer, systems engineer, I learned to look into the chip. DiOrio taught me. And I learned to go, oh, we just shorted the poly to the input pins, didn't you? And how did you know? Well, there's 200 ohms between each pin. So yeah, just a wonderful time to be a young engineer. Also, high school dropout, long hair. Google Bill Hurd with one L. You'll see a picture of me and DiOrio, and I'm the guy with the long hair and short shorts on.
Wow, that was a great overview. I must say that it's going to be difficult to decide what room to go into, but the man who does that and puts people in rooms, his name is on the screen. He's from the University City Science Center, and his name is Jake, and he's in charge of moving you around into rooms, and I think you have to tell him at some point. And then if you want to actually merge into one room, I mean, there's merit to that, so it could be the Bill Hurd, Al Charpentier room. You guys can think about it. It'll be a little mad dash later, but we're going to run over our first hour using the time for introductions. We have 4 more introductions to go. I'm next on the block here. Mine will be short and sweet, but my topic is the MOS Superfund site. MOS Superfund site. Really? Are we going to talk about that? All right. So you might not know my bachelor's degree is in geology. I went to the State University of New York, got a bachelor's degree in geology, and then I went to the University of Pennsylvania and got a master's degree in energy systems, power plants, and so on. In the basement is where I ran into the ENIAC. So my graduate degree was in the same room or the same building where the ENIAC was created, down in the basement. And at that time, I looked at that room and I thought, ENIAC, yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't have time to think about it. So finished my graduate degree, did computer modeling of things, got to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, did lots of computer modeling on mainframes and minis and micros, all with hydrology. So I got to know what a Superfund site was. I got to know what these solvents might do. And so if you look at the name of the company, MOS, right? Metal oxide semiconductor. Well, of course, it's got Superfund written all over it, right? Metal oxide. I mean, I can just feel it already, right? There's going to be a solvent, trichloroethylene, right? Common solvent. leach away all those metals. Got to clean it up. Of course, it's going to go into a tank, probably another tank, probably another pipe. Probably one of them is going to leak. This is the 70s after all. EPA is going to find out. Oh, look at that. You're leaking stuff into the soil. Suddenly a hydrologist like me has got to map the plume, cordon off the area, protect all the people and the families and the schools and the school children from carcinogens. And it's still a super fun site. And that's going to be my story. All right, we're going on to the next person, who is Joachim von Huff. He's all the way over in the eastmost part of our speakers. He's going to talk to us about bringing his Apple-1 to life. Give an introduction of yourself, Joachim. Welcome.
So thank you very much for this very brief introduction, and it's a great pleasure for me joining this session tonight. And I'm not so good in telling, well, stories from the past, but nevertheless, I'm director of the German Computer Museum, and maybe I would like to tell you one story about my past. So I discovered the 6502 back in the 1980s, when I was coding assembler on my Commodore 64. Well, this is not the same processor, but pretty much the same. And so this was my first encounter of this wonderful microprocessor. And we did a very strange thing last year. To be honest, this was a very challenging experience. So we have one of the very few Apple-1 circuit boards on display in our museum. And at a certain point, I decided just to check if this circuit board is still working. And we all know that you have to pay a lot of money for these circuit boards if you want to get one. And I would like to tell you the story, what happened when we tried to bring it back to life in the breakout session. So this is just to build up some tension. Well, I guess you probably checked out the video which we put on YouTube to explain what happened at that point. But I have another story about the 6502, which is probably rather unknown, and this is for the community here. And a couple of years ago, I got in contact with a guy from then Oxford University, and Donny Farmer, and he was a physics student in San Jose in West Coast, and he was using this wonderful microprocessor to build a shoe computer to beat the Las Vegas roulette game. And I stepped very deep in this story, and this was very fascinating. And I suppose since I have all the assembler code of this roulette computing device in our museum storage, this is probably a surprise for some of the experts here in this community, but this was a wonderful application of using microprocessor technology. Well, at that time, to get some money. And if you are interested in this story, I would love to tell you the story in the breakout session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you very much. This is really an amazing assemblage of people. If you scan the room, it's quite something. Steve Krug is going to talk to us a little bit about the architecture of Compuseum. He's a registered professional engineer and an architect. and he has a vision for the future of Confucium. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Jim. And wow, I'm just amazed at all the talent in this room. Thank you for having me. Jim, it was incredible that you've been able to assemble all this talent at one time. So I'm a building architect, the traditional architect that builds buildings. I'm always amazed, and I must confess, it's always impressive when you talk about system architecture, Bill and Al, one-word architecture and high-end architecture that you mentioned. That's not what I'm going to talk about in my session. I'm going to talk about building architecture, sustainable green architecture that I specialize in, and I'm excited to talk about what the Comp Museum architecture future vision might be. And I want to listen and hear from you all what the vision might be and how it might be put together, knowing that there's an awful lot of computer museums and computer collections out there in the world. I'd like to hear your stories. I have thoughts about how to represent all the people stories and how to get people involved, because it's so much about all of you who have stories to tell and capture that and present that, and in what format we can do that. And it may be virtual, it may be physical, but there's certainly some very exciting and inventive ways to go about that. So I'd like to hear from all of you what your thoughts are on it. I'll share my thoughts as well during my session about how a Comp Museum might be able to go into the future along with all the other computer museums that are out there. Exciting to hear from you all.
Thank you, Steve. So next up, Tim Lapatino, The Art of Atari. I don't think is online. I must say he's the only one I think who's not online, which is pretty good. Tim, are you there? You might know Atari from its graphics. I knew Atari from its graphics. I don't think I owned an Atari, used an Atari. I don't know why. Maybe I was in graduate school and I had to submit term papers or something, but he did the graphics. So I do know I saw the graphics and I could see the cult and I could see the following. And the graphics of the packaging was as much of what sold the Atari as the devices themselves, in my opinion. He wanted to speak. He had some conflicts. Tim, are you there? I'm giving you a window here if you are. But we'll get him back the next time because it's a fabulous story of how art was embraced by Atari. And they're very illustrative and graphic in the way that they marketed their products. So next and last but not least, Joachim Bach, the Apple-1 registry. I had no idea there was such a thing. Boy, do I want to hear this. Are you there?
Yes. Hi. So I am running the Apple-1 registry, and it is simply a list of all known Apple-1 computer. And so far, 62 are listed that are verified, and maybe 20 more exist. So for the 20 more, we have just some pictures. So it's not really proven that those exist today. So the mission of the Apple-1 registry is to preserve the history of the Apple-1 and the whereabouts of the Apple-1. So you can have a look to all the computer, you can have a look to all auctions that happened since the year 2000. And so that's a primary mission of the Apple-1 registry. But I have something more. So I talked to Jim Shearer if it is okay to have a second topic. And yes, on some Apple-1, there is a handwritten number on the back. So I have some original Apple-1 here. So you can see that's an original Apple-1. And this one is pretty special. It got, I hope you can see it, a serial number on the back. And the serial number on the back is handwritten. And for 45 years, no one knew who wrote this number. And I was collecting over the years handwriting samples of people involved in the Apple-1 story, people working at the bike shop. And I talked many times to Daniel Kottke, hi, and he gave me some handwriting samples, even of himself. So last year, I was in LA with 2 of my Apple-1, and a forensic examination was done, and the result is clear for both. So now I know who wrote the serial number on the Apple-1. And that's pretty amazing. I will publish it today. I have a letter of authenticity, and I will publish it on the Apple-1 registry. And well, it was really Steve Jobs who wrote it. So, and that's pretty amazing. So my guess was all the time it was Daniel Kottke, and he just simply can't remember. But he gave me a handwriting sample, and instantly I saw, no, that's not possible. That's not the same writing. And yeah, so that's a pretty interesting story. And now it is uncovered.
Joachim, I want everybody to understand, and me too, a little bit about this and the magnitude of what you just stated just now. This is newsworthy. We could do a press release on this. I want you to tell us a little bit about the value of each Apple-1 board or computer, and I want you to tell us a little bit about what it would mean to have Steve Jobs actually write on the back. So you actually have, anybody who has an Apple-1 now knows they also have a legacy Steve Jobs signature, sort of. It's a numerical signature. And Daniel Kottke and you can go back and forth a little bit right now if you want to unmute. Just say about this. I mean, this is momentous, honestly. I do know how secretive or unknown this was. And for you to announce it today on World Computer Day is great for us and the industry. So Joachim, if you could address my questions.
Okay, so the value of an Apple-1, that's not easy to answer. So if you have a look to all the auctions, you will see it was sold in the last years between a little bit more than $100,000 and almost $1 million. So, and there's really no rule if it is an Apple-1 that will sell for 300,000, 500,000, or even more. So it really, really depends who is bidding. And of course, it is very important. Is it a very nice Apple-1? Well, a very nice Apple-1. That's a little bit tricky. So for some people, it is very important to have a very clean board that looks like from a factory built. And for others, it is more important to have a really used old computer with some dust on it and maybe some wires on the back, etc. So it is not easy to say which one is a very, very nice Apple-1 and which one wouldn't in an ordinary Apple-1. So the value of the Apple-1 in the last auctions was almost all the time $400,000 or more. So the last one was 500,000. And now with the handwriting on the back, good question. I really don't know.
Hi, Joachim. So actually what you've done is you've actually, by this discovery, you've probably swapped, or not swapped is probably not the right word. So not every Apple-1 had writing on it. It really was the first ones, the first batch. And and we always assumed that came from the bite shop because Woz didn't know anything about it. Daniel didn't know anything about it. So we assumed it was kind of to prevent warranty fraud, right? Because they weren't written in Sharpie. They were a security marker. You couldn't actually take them off. So what you've done is, for a while, the boards that seemed to have more value for some reason were the NTI boards, which are the second 100 batch that was created, because less of those survived than the earlier boards where they tended to be shoved in a closet and survived. Now what you've done is, if it happens to be a board that has that number on it, it now makes it a more desirable board. And now I'm upset because I sold my byte shop board for a better condition NTI board.
I'm so sorry,
So,
Corey.
yeah, for a better condition NTI board a few years back. But you've actually added something to make the NTIs are not going to be less valuable because of it, but you've actually added something to add a ton of value now to the to these byte shop boards that that have this numbering scheme on the back. Now, it should also be mentioned, not every Apple-1 that has a number on the back, it is an accurate number. I actually had one where I had to send it out for chemical analysis to prove that the number was actually, I didn't even go to the handwriting. I just went and said, it's the wrong ink. It was easier to have a lab report.
Yeah.
So you do have, you do see that, but you've actually found something. And to put this in perspective, things signed by Steve Jobs or written by Steve Jobs, because he didn't do it very often, and it was very hard to find samples of what he's written, have a very high value to collectors, especially collectors in the world of high tech. They kind of they feel an affinity to him, so they sort of collect these items, right? So it's an amazing thing that you're able to actually figure this out and get the documentation proof. But it's also now fills in a mystery we had, for 40, almost 50 years. So,
yeah.
Thank you for this work.
There are 200 Apple-1 built in 2 different batches, 100 each. So only Apple-1 of the first batch gets this number, but not all, as Corey said. The story is, I believe, Steve Jobs put on this serial number just as a proof. It was given to the byte shop. Not only 50 boards were given to the byte shop. The byte shop received many more and sold some to a company, I think, data something. I forgot. And so probably 80 or so were sold to the byte shop, and probably 80 got a number on the back. But today, I have knowledge of 29 Apple-1 with a handwritten number on the back. And I have contact to 21 owners. So I'm missing only 8. So hopefully after this video presentation, I get in contact with these 8 people. So as you can imagine, some of the Apple-1 owners are pretty shy. They want to stay behind. They want to keep it under the carpet. They own an Apple-1. But I have a knowledge of quite a lot of Apple-1 that are not listed in the registry. The people who owns it don't want to have a picture or even a note on the registry that it is that this Apple-1 exists. So hopefully I can publish some more in the near future and get in contact with now hopefully all Apple-1 owners. So that's my hope.
I have a question for you. What do you know about the Henry Ford's Apple-1?
I just know it has a number on the back.
I'm the one who restored it. So sorry, I'm the one who restored it. So what do you want to know?
Well, I've seen it. Kristen bought it then from you, or?
No, I actually did the restoration work for the auction house. So if so if you want to know anything about it, I have some very detailed video and photographs and everything I took while the process was being done. It was in great condition because it was actually under glass since about 1980. The big challenge with that one, believe it or not, was the power supply and the keyboard. The power supply was pretty much unsafe and required a lot of work to bring it back without, substituting in like modern parts. Basically everything had to go back to the way it was. And the keyboard, I had zero schematics, zero anything. It was an oddball keyboard and it was fun. And that's in quotes and sarcastic, to go out and create schematics for it and then figure out why it didn't work and what was wrong with it. Because it wasn't simple key switches. And you didn't want to do the shotgun method.
Hey, Corey, I have one of 3 Commodore LCD machines. You want to restore it for me?
I can.
I didn't know you guys did that kind of thing. We'll have to talk.
But that's something I do. It's one of my things. I do a lot of restorations. like, Helios drives that, making sure they work, that kind of stuff. And I do all the, I'm surprised you haven't seen, no one's shown you some of the videos where I actually have a spray booth and I'm respraying machines to get like splatter coats and stuff to make the paints match. And I mean, it's sometimes you do a deep restoration if it doesn't have a historical significance, but you need it for like an exhibit. And other times you do a very museum-based restoration where it's really about curation and making sure that the artifact doesn't degrade over time, right? So the one for the Henry Ford was definitely done about curation and not restoration. I said I restored it, but there really wasn't much to restore about it. It was more about curation and making sure that that board would be around for another 50 to 100 years in perfect shape, right? And making sure that it gets powered on as needed.
I'd like to interrupt here. Actually, I don't want to interrupt here, but I think I must. So we have a certain amount of time, and I want to make sure we get the maximum use of the time. We're actually 20 minutes into the second hour, which leaves 40 minutes left. I do believe they closed the door. They shut it down at 5 o'clock. It's kind of a structured thing. Jake can confirm that. If Jake sent a text out right now that said, I can go longer, tell us what it is. If not, I'm expecting it to be shut down at 5 o'clock. So that gives us 40 minutes. What's the optimum use of the 40 minutes? I had like an epiphany, which was maybe the speakers talk to each other. Maybe you get to highlight something. If you're going to show something, do it in the context of talking. But then I'd like to let the audience ask some questions too. So maybe what we do is for half an hour, all of us speakers talk to each other, maybe ask questions that we had, and then at the end of that 30-minute or so period, we have 10 minutes left. I would open it up to all the viewers, not the speakers, because many of your questions might get answered within the context of a dialogue back and forth. So while I did advertise that you would all have a breakout room and you'd have an hour and you'd need to be prepared for an hour or something or other, somehow this got changed. It was too exciting. I must tell you, with Joachim Bach telling us this announcement, we all here on World Computer Day can be excited because I'm quite sure you're going to read this in press globally. Honestly, that kind of a finding resonates with lots of people. It's sensational. Joachim Bach is the owner of the vision, the news release, the press release, but we all can propel it out there and elevate it and give it its just due. So let's see how fast we can have that news spread out into the world through our own networks. So if you all agree that I just changed the format and you're okay, kind of go like this. If you don't like it, go like this. All right, we got okay, Jim. All right. So
yeah,
anyway.
I think Liza had a suggestion.
Yes, Liza, go ahead. Liza, if you had a suggestion, I turn the floor to you if you wish. Go ahead, Liza.
I put it in the chat. We can do this spontaneously. If anybody wants to break out, they can send a private message to the speaker and to Jake, and Jake can set up the room for us.
Oh, there's an idea.
And then everybody wants to stay in this room can stay, and anybody who's really frustrated because they wanted to have a private conversation, we can set it up on the fly.
I like that too. Also, I can add, if you're interested, if I get all the email addresses, which I could get from the University City Science Center, I could email another Zoom invitation for the official day, which would be next Tuesday, if you wish. So we'll just see how that goes. This is what happened for ENIAC Day, I must tell you. We went all week long, and we had several Zoom things and remote rooms. We had chats. It's going on and on. It's really quite fun. Thank you very much for your interest and for attending. So maybe what I'll do is, if you want to ask a question of somebody and you're a speaker and you want to ask it of another speaker, physically raise your hand, or you can use your hand in the Zoom chat. I've never figured out how to do that myself. I know there's a hand you can put up. I do want to ask, I have a question. So I don't know if it's Bill or Al or who, but I like this idea that we got a mini Silicon Valley right here in the Schuylkill River Valley, right? I mean, MOS is metal oxide semiconductor, right? We're talking chips here, right? So they were here. I don't know if they were earlier or later, but how many more chip fab groups were there around here? And I remember the term fab. There was no fab, right? They were all one kind of design, manufacturer, and now they're separate fabrication works. And but anyway, what else was around here in southeastern Pennsylvania that was manufacturing chips? How did that happen? Is there a pre-Silicon Valley in the Schuylkill Valley? Bill.
I only know of a couple other companies, and I don't even remember the names, but there was probably about 2 other companies that actually could build chips in, Lehigh Valley or, Schuylkill Valley. Those 2 other companies were small companies, just like MOS. So there was no major semiconductor company that I'm aware of. But probably some other people there might know a lot more than I do about it.
Certainly not major. We all would have heard it, but if there's some minor ones, I'm very curious how the technology got going. You read about this ruby lith and the masking phenomenon and how these changed over time. It's quite something.
Yeah, the other major contributor there was Bell Labs, and so Bell Labs is, they were doing things that were quite revolutionary. And the other one would be IBM. IBM had their own wafer manufacturing, and they were leading the industry, I believe. It was all captured. So actually IBM's 360 required integrated circuits. So actually they were, I don't know where that fits into the integrated circuit family of chips, but that predates, that was 1965 when I think that IBM 360 was starting to be promoted. And that was integrated circuits. Now, it was small scale integration, so they didn't integrate the whole thing. But that was really, if you go back and investigate the IBM 360, you'll find that it was actually, I think, an 8-bit microprocessor, but it could do multiple bytes for floating point, etc. So that there's a 3 or 4 page article from the Computer History Museum out in Mountain View. If you can find one of the old editions of their newsletter, there's a fantastic article in there about the IBM 360. So actually, I think on the East Coast, it would have been IBM and Bell Labs would be the big players. But I don't know that much.
GI. There was GI in Long Island. That was the other one.
Yeah, GI is another one, isn't it?
Yeah, Long Island. When I was considering leaving Commodore at the end there, I actually interviewed with GI in Long Island, but I ended up doing my own company. But that's how I knew of them.
Well, all right, quick thing. I would be ashamed not to have Corey Cohen show you up close and personal with the sign MOS Technologies right there. Corey, can you chat a lot? I know you spent some time to do a show and tell. So
yeah, no, I wasn't doing this to distract for anyone. I just wanted to figure if people are
I love it. You have something there that's real. Show a little bit.
Yeah. So no, I just and I just didn't want to distract anyone's conversations. I just figured, anyone who's flipping around will see some stuff. So I decided to I went over to the Apple-1 replica. It's currently set up in this. I'll show you that in a second. It's currently set up in the same board structure we did, I think, for the Gates First Jobs for the movie for Smithsonian. But this is a Kim 1. What makes this one rare is the fact that this Kim 1 actually has the case, and I have the top on the other side, which is usually they didn't have a case. But you'll see the 6502 is here, and you'll see there are 2 other support chips. And this was, even though there isn't a keyboard as we traditionally think of one, a full-fledged computer that, these guys were involved with. And really, I think without this to demonstrate what the 6502 could do, I don't think Commodore would have gone into the computer business. So yeah, we owe a lot to this board. And yep.
Is that a Commodore or an MOS?
This is an MOS.
Yeah, so that's older. That's also
Yes,
why
it
it's
is.
rare.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's rare because it's older. I have to look at the revision. But yeah, it's a Rev A. So yeah, it's an early one. You should know this. You're here all the time. But yeah, it's a very early one.
Just opening the conversation.
Yes, thank you. This I just should mention. These are not actually. That's kind of what it looks like. Someone has taken the connectors and wired it up and stuff. And what people wound up doing was they wound up using surplus teletypes or TV typewriters, and they wired them up so that they could actually use it as a full-fledged computer. This was the first computer you probably could play chess on at your home, because the first sort of microcomputer chess was written for this. So, that's really, the most I'm going to talk about it, because we actually have the people who help, work on this here. And if they want to add anything in, we did talk a little bit about, or they did talk a little bit about the Kim one. So.
All right, I see a hand up, Andre Fischat from Germany. Take it away, Andre. You officially have that yellow hand up there. I don't think anybody else knows how to push that button. At least I don't. But since you do, I'm calling on you, Andre Fischat.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a question that bothers me for quite a while, because everyone today is using Atmel, Arduino stuff type microcontrollers, and I've always wondered why hasn't there been any kind of 6502 based or 65816 based microcontroller like that with built-in flash, or let it be EEPROM before flash. Because it could have ruled the world even more than it did. Yeah. If that has happened. Maybe Bill Mensch, I don't know.
I was going to jump in. The thing about the Arduino to me as a systems designer is the software. The 2313 was what we called a keyboard controller from the 90s. So to me, the Arduino is not, it's just a little keyboard controller, but you could sit down, and I showed my son how to write code for a Morse code, little dee thing, showed him subroutines and everything. And I got the IDE running in 20 minutes, like a civilian would, as opposed to all the other development systems where you spend a day trying to get it to work. So to me, the Arduino was the genius of it was the fact that it came with the development system that people at home could use. So we did use the Kim 1 at the company I talked about before, Commodore. We did our development on the Kim 1. So that was our Arduino of the day, would be my answer to you.
Excellent. I love that he actually put up his yellow hand there, so I knew to call on him. Does anybody else want to throw up a yellow hand or just a physical hand like that? And then you can ask a question. There are lots of talented people in the room. I also want to call your attention to, I had a little room flash up, a breakout room thing. So you can actually join somebody's room. It doesn't look like there's many of that, but there is that. So at this time, feel free to go to the room if you want, but otherwise you can stay here. I open the floor to questions from any of you, to any of us. Anybody in the audience can now ask the question. Certainly Bob Roswell has a question.
While Corey was talking, my doc called and told me that I indeed have COVID, and I'm feeling like crap.
I'm sorry.
So I had a positive PCR test yesterday.
I'm sorry. Well, we're all going to have COVID someday, but go ahead and ask your question. You got lots of time here. He doesn't have one. Yes.
I don't have one, but I'll be curious to take a look at the serial number on the back of the Apple-1 that's in the virtual screen behind me and see if it's the same handwriting.
You mean Akim Bach's background?
No, my background.
Oh, your background.
Slide there. There's an Apple-1 in there.
And you're lucky. It has a written number on the back.
You looked it up in the registry, didn't you, to check? So Bob Roswell actually has a pretty famous Apple-1. His is the Apple-1 in the quote unquote briefcase that has a bit of provenance to it. So I'm sure Joachim has some great pictures of that one.
Yeah, I visited the owner over, I think, 2 or 3 years before it was up for auction. And he's a very nice guy. And yeah, I had a very, very close look to this Apple-1. And I even unscrewed it from the briefcase to have a look to the back, because he was too afraid, the former owner, to do it by himself. And I told him, well, I'm pretty curious if there is a number on the back. So I was always trying to find if there is a number on the back.
Well, you know what you've done now. Now we have to check every time that we see a number now. Now we have to check that it's actually the same handwriting and that someone actually hasn't added it. So yeah. So I'm not going to. So I actually have the chemical reports and what the pen is, but I'm not going to share them. So.
But, well, the good we have the Apple-1 registry, just because we have all the pictures of most of the Apple-1, and so we know which one has a number and which one has not. So if a new Apple-1 is now on the surface, well, we have to prove, is it a real one? Correct?
Yep. Oh, I hope after you looked at that Apple-1 a few years ago, you washed your hands really well. Bob, do you want to tell a quick little story about what was found in the briefcase after you purchased it?
The main thing we found was a little bit of mold.
And it wasn't light mold; it was the bad kind, right? And then it was a lot of and it was a lot. And I think you had a challenge just trying to find the right way to address it without damaging things, but to kill the mold. So these are some of the dangerous things that we run into when we deal with vintage computers. Is sometimes there's some things in there that aren't so good for you.
I have a super fun comment question.
Go for it.
So were you aware about the sprinkler where they were aerating the groundwater? And the question part is Al, did they have that while you were there? The sprinklers in the parking lot, behind the parking lot?
Yes, we had the sprinklers behind the parking lot because that leak occurred, I think, sometime in the late 70s that it leaked. And it was probably around 79 or 80 that those sprinklers were installed. And they ran for...
Right.
Right. Yeah, it may have been even as early as 78. But yeah, that was really a big mess. I mean, it's still a mess.
My first day there, I parked in the wrong part of the parking lot and came out to a sticky windshield with leaves stuck to it.
Oh,
and
good.
It took me 20 minutes to peel the leaves off my windshield.
Yeah, you learn very quickly not to go to that side of the parking lot.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, watch which way. Yeah, Bill, you and I sharing a room would probably be the right thing because we have so many, we crossed over. What year did you join there again?
83.
So 83.
Late
That's
82,
just
83.
as I was leaving, because I left in September of 82. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, you could have continued the legacy there.
Well, I have a timing comment for you because you and me know the same things, right? We've got the time for the VIC chip, the time for the processor, and then DRAMs have their own weird timing, right?
Yes.
Time RAS pre-charge,
Yes.
is different than
CAS and CAS and all that good stuff.
Right. Well, that's what we did. We made a 48-pin VIC chip I believe we did 48 pins for the 128, and we added a MUX pin because you guys had to use RAS for the MUX.
Yes.
Or CAS for the MUX, one of the two. And we said, no, we're making our whole pin just for the MUX timing on that. So, yeah, we used VisiCalc. Whoever mentioned VisiCalc, we got the DRAM timings to work due to VisiCalc.
Yeah, that was definitely a big challenge to make that whole RAS-CAS thing work in that environment back in the.
And then production was soldering capacitors on CAS and stuff. It was brutal.
It was brutal.
It was brutal. That's a great word for it.
I remember trying to just tweak that to get it just right so that all the timing would just work. Because in the VIC-1 we didn't have that because it was made for static RAM.
Right.
And when we went to the 64, it was the DRAM. and it was really an interesting design challenge.
Right. Well, I tell people making millions is like playing with a fire hose. If you're off by a nanosecond, everything gets wet. It's just, you get skids of, just skids of broken computers and stuff if you got your timing off, or you're using micron DRAMs or something like that. Right?
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned earlier about making 6 million, and actually in the Guinness Book of World Records,
27 million.
Yeah, you got it. Yes,
27 million. Commodore 64.
You were adding then, if you added the number of Apple-2s that were involved with that, I mean, the number of computers that were built with a
they did like 5 or 6 or something like that. Yeah, I'm a Commodore fan. True blood Commodore fan. Sorry,
yeah,
Apple.
it's amazing how many 6502s, and then you have obviously what Bill did with for the game machines with what's the name with
Atari.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Liza's got a question. Liza Loop, jump on in.
Oh, I just wanted to add to the contamination discussion because I have an expansion box. It's not a 6502 because it's a Radio Shack, but the expansion box has a mouse nest with the skeleton of the mouse. So I think that's probably the original mouse for the Radio Shack.
Yeah, I think it would be.
Occupational
Andre,
hazard.
Oh, look at that.
Andre, another question from Andre, or put your hand down. I see 2 yellow hands.
Yeah. I have a question.
Go ahead, Andre.
You just talked about the DRAM timing and stuff, and thanks again, Bill, for that DRAM discussion we had a couple of years ago. But maybe you can shed some more insights into the history of the Commodore 64, and I believe there was this static RAM version before that. Is there something you can talk about?
Early on, well, the original VIC-20 and the VIC-1 chip, which was based on, that was set up for static RAM. And then when I did the VIC-2 for the Commodore 64, well, originally it was going to be a 40 character display, so it was going to be a VIC-40. But during the design process, the 64K RAM became available. And it was actually Jack Tramiel who came and said, listen, let's make this thing 64K because it'll be a really big marketing thing. Okay. So it was a really challenging moment because of the fact that he was like, well, we got to put 64K in there because of the fact that it'll really catch everybody's attention without any regard to what it meant to the design.
Right.
Yeah. That's when you had to switch from static to dynamic RAM?
Yes. And so we had to all of a sudden figure out how to make the timing work with an address muck system between the VIC chip and the processor. And yeah, it was a challenge because the fastest clock we had in the system at the time, I think, was the 3.5 megahertz. And so you just had enough time to make all of that fly together and switch the different signals in RAS and CAS to make it all work. Yeah, but it was we had a 4 megahertz clock and a 3.5 megahertz clock in there. Okay, they were phase locked in order to.
Yeah. You had an 8 meg dot clock. If I remember,
8 meg.
8.18. Yeah, and so you used half of that to get your to nail down your edges.
Right. Well, there's a funny story about this going back to, I mean, I know we're in 6502 world, but what happened was the original one that I showed at CES back in January of 82 only had the 3.5 megahertz system in it. Okay. And it wouldn't allow me to get a full 40 characters. It only had like 36. And I was annoyed that it couldn't get 40. So we came back from CES and I made a change on the chip so that it would run at the higher speed and then simply use the clock, the 3.5 megahertz for the color sync NTSC. Well, that created a shimmer.
Right.
Okay, yeah. And then so we ended up having to add a phase lock loop in order to make everything lock in space. And it was like I remember the first time it came out, we saw the shimmer on the screen and I went, uh-oh. It was really scary, but thank God phase lock loop saved my life.
Right. Yeah, we did a chip then, because that phase lock loop circuitry is one of the most complicated things on the very first Commodore 64s, that whole path of there. And we put in an 8701 and called it a day. It had a 14.318 meg output and the dot clock 818 or whatever it was output.
Right. Yeah, that was the only thing. It was the only solution that we could do to stop the shimmer, and it worked great. I mean, it was a really good thing. It allowed us to get the 40 characters and still have the color. So it was a good solution to the problem.
We did have to open the VIC chip then for the 64 when TV sets stopped having vertical holds on them. They all rolled. And we had to rev the VIC chip. I think there was something wrong. I think we were missing like a pixel or something. And when it went from analog with a control to control, where you make your TV just listen to whatever it is, to the digital thing. Yeah, we had to rev the VIC chip one last little time, just tiniest little bit.
Tweak that in there. That's fun. Yeah. Well, again, it was like. It was the 6502, and it was such an elegant design that allowed that so much flexibility in how the hardware implementation does. I mean, somebody's talking about WOS, and I think Bill mentioned at the CES or the WES where there was the big barrel. We had a barrel full of 6502s that you can buy for $20, and WOS got that, and I can remember being there for that, and actually Jobs had come by as well, and Chuck Peddle was talking to them about you guys ought to really take a hard look at this thing. So it's kind of really back in the old history there.
Yeah, Chuck said he went out there then and helped WOS get it working. I always remembered that he got stuck. Yeah, he got stuck, and Chuck went out and got his initial thing working, is what Chuck told me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that little piece of history. I can just remember them being in a room together, Chuck and WOS and Jobs, trying to work out the details how they were going to get this thing to work. And I was just sitting in the background listening.
The 8080 was like over $100, right? It was much.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
mean,
than that, right?
It was a couple hundred, I think it was.
The 8080 was almost $500.
Oh, okay.
And the deal that MITS cut was they took all the cosmetic defects, and that's why they got them very cheaply, because the perfect ones were going for mil spec and things like that. So that's actually so he was able to sell the Altair for about the same price as the chip on its own. That's actually one of the ways if it's a changed chip on an early Altair is they're all cosmetic defects.
Wow.
I didn't know that little history. Yeah. It's amazing.
All right, folks, I'm opening up the questions to anybody in the audience who wants to ask anything of these esteemed experts. You see, I have this thing called the raise the hand in my thing. So go down to where it says reactions and raise your hand and do that, or just wave your hand like this. And if you want to ask a specific person, you can call out their name, or you can just shout it out to anyone you wish. This is quite a forum, and I'm kind of winging it here, hoping to get the best value from all this talent. In the remaining few minutes, we have 11. The participants now are down from 62. So this is sort of how it goes. It'll be dinner time somewhere, and then the kids jump in, or somebody's got to go off to work or something. But it's really a good crowd so far. So if somebody wants to raise their hand and ask a question, it can be also, if the audience doesn't ask a question, then it can also be any of the speakers as well. So go ahead, anybody.
Yeah, just kind of noticed there are some questions in the chat. Not sure if those people want to read them, or if you read them and then maybe someone else answers them.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah, Lisa said they've got a breakout room for non-technical is the way they're treating it too.
Got it.
Okay, maybe let me read out the question from Lee O'Donnell. So here's got a question. The 6502 was obviously born in the 70s, but something that still seems strange for then was the inclusion of the BCD mode, binary to code decimal. Was this due to its heritage from use in calculators?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, hey, Bill, Bill Mensch, do you know if, that particular function, I do not recall why that was included, whether, I don't believe it was any it may have been something that you guys were thinking about, but I don't believe it was a push between the calculator group and they were very separate design entities at the time. I don't know if Bill's still on or not.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Do you remember, Bill?
Well, Chuck was the one that was picking the instruction set, and he was the one that was the final sign off on what we put on the chip.
Right.
Will Mathis had quite a bit of experience in system design.
Yeah, he was the guy that I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know who's the one that wanted the decimal mode, but I did the design of it, and so I actually simulated it in Fortran. But the idea was we could switch between binary and decimal.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Now, as it turns out, there are some people, like I think Nintendo, disabled that. They didn't want the decimal mode. As it turns out, when I designed the CMOS version, I didn't want to violate my own patent. So I put an extra cycle in the decimal correct, and that caused the asteroids to break up. So Atari never used the CMOS version. Actually, Apple is the only company that's used the NMOS 6502, the 65C02, and the 65816. They're the only company that used all three of my designs.
How about that? Yeah.
But anyhow, the decimal correct thing, was one of the things. That's the only patent we got. We didn't have a patent on anything else. And when we had such a welcome to the industry at WestCon, and of course it was soon after that Motorola had to do something, and so they had us remove the 6501 from the market, and Rod and I had this friendly bet, probably a beer, on which would sell the most, and Rod said the 6501 would sell the most, and I go, well, why the 6501? And he says, well, because we're going to steal the 6800 sockets. If you look at the original schematics for the Apple-1, you'll see that it could either have the 6800 or the 6502. The clock system was two-phase clock system that the 6800 needed. So if you look at those old schematics, Wozniak didn't put 6501 or 6502. He had 6800 and 6502. Yeah. So that's just a little interesting tidbit there. I don't know if anybody ever tried building the Apple-1 with the clock generation for the 6800. It'd be interesting.
Actually, someone in Australia did. They produced one for the 6800, and they had to rewrite his, obviously because the opcodes are different. They had to rewrite WOS monitor. We haven't tried this one yet in a board that's been modified. Obviously, you wouldn't do it on a real one because you have to modify the board. We might try one day to do this on this is the 6501. We'll try and do this probably one day on our own here, or I'll bring one in, a replica, to do it on. Just a curiosity, right? See how it goes. But yeah,
we
need to
jump
know
in
the
right
board
now.
works
It
with
looks
the
like
clock
we
cycle.
have 6 minutes. I see 3 hands up. Leo, Donald, Daniel, Kottke, and Alex Sorov. I don't know if you really want your hand up, but just jump in, Daniel.
This is addressed to Bill Mensch. So I saw on some other video, you mentioned that the 6800 yield was like down around 30%, and the 6502 was up around 70%. Using your NMOS process. I wonder if you could comment about the factors of why the yields got so much better.
Okay, well, actually, I think that 6800 was much lower than 30%. But Ed Armstrong, who was the head of the fab at Motorola for the process that was used for the 6800 family of chips, he grew a long beard waiting for getting 10 good dies per wafer. So we may have gotten, 10 times that off of our wafer.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because of that spot knocking the reticles. So we could get perfect reticles. That was done painstakingly. And so then also we were using proximity masks. That means that we just have to use one mask set and do, get what would be considered near perfect mask set, where Motorola had a mask shop and they were using contact masks. So that means that they had to keep getting new mask sets because they might have used them for only one wafer run, if that. So there was a huge difference between the mask shops. There was a huge difference on the manufacturing. The manufacturing of the 6502 was always depletion mode. And actually, I was the one that designed the control monitor for the Motorola 6800 family. And that meant that I designed the circuitry that was stepped in 5 different places on a wafer. And so then we would test those to make sure the wafer was in this specification, so the design engineers could be able to say, no, our chip will work when it's got these design parameters. So that's what I designed. So the design group I designed the process control monitor. Well, what I did at Motorola was also designed in the same silicon lattice structure. I had both the enhancement mode load design circuits and the depletion load, but Motorola didn't want to run the depletion implant. And so finally they did. But by that time, I already knew what we were going to do at MOS Technology. So the depletion load was much more forgiving, and we could do 0 to 5 volts easy with that. At Motorola, we had to do bootstrap inverters so we could get the 5 volts. Intel wasn't bothering doing that. They had multiple supply lines for the 8080. So in other words, the big deal was not only the mask shop, but also the depletion loads, which created a smaller chip. So our chip was about 50% the size of theirs. We had the projection or the proximity mask. And so that whole thing gave us like a 10 times. We had higher yield, and then it was very forgiving. In fact, they double implanted the depletion implant one time, and I had on my little tester, I have the only tester that was used for the first 2.5 years. So those first Apple-1s that you're talking about were tested. Those chips were tested on my tester that I have in my little museum in Arizona. But what I was going to say is that double implant, they would run at 10 megahertz. So back in the day, I had 10 megahertz running on that tester, which could run up to 10 megahertz. It used 2 pages of ECL RAM. I used an ASR33 teletype with paper tape, and that's how I loaded the test programs for all the chips that MOS built in the beginning of this whole revolution.
Bill, that's a great answer. I have one hand up in the air there, yellow hand from Alex Sakaro, Root, Australia. You have a question for somebody?
I was just simply to Bill to just find out where the 6502 is being used today. And you're still selling it, and is it still used industrially? Where is it used?
Yeah, they're used all over the world. But I wanted to show you something, just so you know that we're still swinging for the fences. This is a 200 millimeter wafer of plastic 6502s. This was built in Cambridge, England, using the same functionality that the Apple IIc was introduced with and the Apple IIe. So this is a wafer, glass wafer with plastic on it. And then how they test these things. And then this is plastic 65 CO2s. So this is going to go on labels. And so these will be able to have RF. So in your refrigerator, if you want to know the date of your food that you have in the refrigerator, or if you want to say, hey, I'm at the shopping mall, what do I have in my refrigerator? You'll be able to scan all of the things because of these labels that are on there. But here is 100 plastic 6502s. So that's what we're doing there. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that Cadence, who is a world-leading PDA company, Cadence and a company in Aurora, Colorado, have asked me to recreate the system on chip design class that I taught at ASU for 5 years. Anyhow, we're going to be making available our very high value technology for colleges throughout the world, promoted by Cadence and Muse in multi-project wafers. So you'll be able to build your own system on a chip if you go to a qualified university.
Well, it's great to see the 6502 still rocking after decades.
Yeah, in fact, the one that's really rocking that you don't hear much about, and we haven't talked about today, is the original Macintosh mouse interface used the 65C22. In fact, Jobs, through whoever was working on the Mac at the time, asked me to make a change so it would work with the 68,000. So those original Macs that you have, check out the mouse interface in there, and you'll find it's the 65C22. Now, what's also interesting about that is that the 65C22 is our highest volume chip to this day. And so it's been used with other microprocessors. We sell them, and we don't ask them what microprocessor they're using, but that's a higher volume. The other thing you want to check out is Ben Eater, E-A-T-E-R. He has a little 6502 computer kit, and he, by the way, is the one that created the technology platform for the Khan Academy. And so he has these kits. They're breadboard, they're solderless breadboard kits. I think he may even have a PCB kit now. But anyhow, that's where you can find out for educational purposes how to start just programming the microprocessor that changed the world.
Hey, Bill, hold up your wafer again.
Hold up.
Bill, I put Ben Eater's link in the chat.
Yeah,
So
Ben Eater's, what he's doing is just awesome. He's got a great tutorial. You want that, you mean?
Yeah, look at the size. This is the size they were back in the 80s. I got this out of the basement of the MOS building about 4 years ago. There were actually wafers in the basement. Look at the size difference between what you have and this, though. That's just always blows me away.
What's that one? Is that one a 4 or 6 inch or 5 inch there, Bill?
5 inch.
5 inch, yeah. The original, I think, Bill, the original ones when you did the original 6502s were 4 inch even.
Yeah, and in fact, I used to carry around the highest yielding PIA. I designed, there's two chips that Wozniak used, right? I designed both of them. And I have patents on both of them.
They should be.
I used to carry in the third pocket here. I used to carry the highest yielding wafer of PIAs, and it was a 2.5 inch wafer. That's what Motorola started with. I think it was 3 inches at MOS at first, and then it probably went to 4, and then whatever you have there is 5. Yeah. But they were much smaller wafers, so that's another factor that could be that we had a bigger wafer at MOS than what Motorola had in its day. So you can imagine trying to get 10 good 6800s on a 2.5 inch wafer.
Bill, were you there when they did the 10% shrink of the masks in order to get more? Was that
HMOS1 and HMOS2?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. We went through that. They became the 7000s and then the 8000s. So the 8510 is HMOS2 version of the 6510.
Okay. I was wondering because I knew we had the 10% shrink, which made things go faster. And
it did a lot of things.
I think actually.
Recording stopped.
There you go. We're done.
Then we're done, I guess.
Well, keep talking. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say I think it was 20% shrink, but I
have. It may have been. Yeah.
It's 10 and 10. Yeah.
Yeah. 10 and 10. Right.
Well. But anyhow, I have both the original size 6502 in my little museum and the immediate shrink. We immediately planned to shrink it. So that gave us another advantage over Motorola and Intel. And so we pulled out all the stops there. And the big key was that depletion load, which made a big difference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a Walt Eisenhower thing. Yep.
Yeah, Bill, your 6522 made real-time operating systems possible when you made the self-reloading timer. so that it automatically reloaded without the processor going in and load it. That meant I could tell time, and if I can tell time, I can run analog to digital converters accurately. So you open the field for RTOS, real-time operating systems.
Yeah, I want another little tidbit, just because we talked a lot about history. Chuck missed a flight back in the day, back in 1975, after we introduced the 6502. I think it was after we introduced it, not before. But so I went to Lehigh. That's, where the National Honor Society for Engineers, Tau Beta Pi, was started at Lehigh. So I was there when Chuck missed his flight. So then I gave the first talk on the 6502 at a university, and that was at Lehigh. I've got a thank you note found in one of my memorabilia. But I just thought you'd like to know that it wasn't MIT. It wasn't some other, it was Lehigh.
Very cool. Hey, Al, somebody asked a question in the chat about how'd you pick the colors for the VIC?
Well, yeah, it was really one of those things where the circuitry to do the phase shifting was a set of op amps where I was feeding sine and cosine into it.
Right.
And and literally I was adjusting the size of the sine and the cosine in order to get the phase shift. Okay. Well, back then, I couldn't have a really big A to D converter to control the amounts of phase shift that I could get. So it was sort of a little serendipity that I could pick out ones that I could get accurately and reproducibly, that fit the colors that I had. Okay. And I knew I needed the primaries, red, blue, green, and such, the primary basics. And the rest of them sort of fell where they were because that was sort of halfway in between where I could get the reasonable numbers. And from VIC-1 to VIC-2, I had improved that phase modulator. So I learned a little bit more about being able to accurately control the sine and cosine mix. So we were able to get a little bit better control out of those. Yeah. That was a fascinating design to get that to work.
Wozniak was still doing those same tricks with the Apple-II, right? He was like, it was like a digital control of what is basically that weird world that is analog video, right?
Yes, it was that was the way they squeezed color into the original black and white spec to get color in there.
It all goes back to color TV in 1949 or something, right?
Exactly, and that was the way they were able to get it backwards compatible with the color, with the black and white, so that you could still put a color signal into a black and white TV.
RS-170. Yeah.
I had one more question to add in there. I'm trying to picture you guys working, but what were you looking at? Did you have graphics workstations?
Jeez, no.
Were you printing this shit out? How did it actually work on chips when it was before workstations?
Well, I mean, basically, as Bill was saying, you did the simulations of your speed and such with Fortran, okay, and you did all of the digital design simulation. I mean, you laid it out on a big sheet of paper, and you did it by hand. There wasn't any computers to help you do that. Your logic was correct. You had to do it by hand. And Bill, did you have the big, when you were there, I know, but when I was doing the VIC chips and so forth.
I have to interrupt. I'm sorry. This is a special message from on high. I'm interrupting because it's now cocktail hour. We were given an extra hour.
Okay.
Jake handed me the keys to the car.
Okay.
So he gave me one more hour. He went home, but we should give him a round of applause. Thank you very much, Jake at University City Science Center, who's the host of this digital event. So thank you very much for giving me a little time there. But I now open it up to anyone. Again, feel free to ask questions. It's wonderful to see how many people still want to hang on. So one more hour, I think.
Jim, just FYI, the recording had stopped at 5, so I don't know if you could restart the recording.
I am not. He didn't give me those keys, but this means that what goes on in the rest of the meeting won't go on Facebook tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can let go all the dirty stories.
Recording in progress.
This meeting. Somebody turned it on.
Yeah.
Al, you were asking about the tables, though, the light tables just now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we used to lay the things out on light tables. And
We still
literally-
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't, Bill, you
There
had
was
to-
no ERC, no DRCs.
None.
Yeah.
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 It was all done by hand, and literally you would check the schematic. You would draw a big schematic on a big giant piece of paper, or 10 or 15, 20 pages, and then you would check the layout by hand from the schematic
For months.
For months, yes. I had Bill, Bill Mensch, I mean, did you guys do that on the O2? Because I didn't get involved in the checkout of that. Would you guys do it that way as well?
Yeah, we had to check everything by hand.
Right.
And, we checked the individual cells that matched up with what was intended. So that was a check. But then also, we used to tape the whole thing up on a wall, which meant that if you look at the picture that was in EE Times, you'll see that in the background of the picture. So we had it taped all over, so we can trace the lines from one end of the chip to the other end of the chip. Everything had to be manually checked.
Yep.
We could simulate in what would have been considered like early SPICE. It was circuit schematic, but we could only actually could only simulate 100 transistors or less at a time. Now I can simulate the entire 65 CO2 and the 816 on my notebook. So now I can do that. But back then, you only had 100 transistors. So you had to figure out which 100 transistors you wanted to simulate. So we would simulate the speed of inverters. And for instance, one of the things that I did with the design of the 6502 was actually build the clock generator on the chip, which Steve Diamond, who interviewed me, it was a 2-hour and 39-minute interview that you can find on the Computer History Museum. Steve Diamond, we went for a couple hours before the interview and then a couple hours after. I think we went to dinner, whatever. But what he was saying is that, so Bill, how did you get the clock generator to work? I go, well, we never had a problem. I said, so did you have a problem? And he goes, yeah, we could never get ours to work. And I said, well, how many engineers did you have choosing the transistor sizes and the circuitries and actually doing the schematic? He says, well, I don't know, we had probably 10. He said, that was your problem. I knew where all the data critical paths were, so I knew how I could work it where I had two levels of logic, that the feedback path on the registers, and so that's what I designed the clock generator. We never made a change to the clock generator. So the 6501 and the 6502 were exactly the same design, except the metal layer, we connected up the two-phase clock generator. So that's how that worked. It never had to be redesigned. It always was high yielding, and it was always forgiving because the clock generator, if it was a fast process, everything was fast. If it was a slow process, everything was slow. So everything tracked. It was just a wonderful outcome of the whole thing. And then Motorola sued us because Chuck and Rod thought, and Will thought we were going to steal sockets, 6,800 sockets that Motorola sales worked hard at getting. And so they had us remove the 6501. And that day I won a little bet with Rod because my 6502 then won the bet.
Bill, I put a link to your interview from Computer History Museum in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a long interview.
Yeah, it's a good one though.
The one I like the best is in Wikipedia. I didn't know about it until about a year ago. And actually, anytime I am on one of these, I dread the transcript of them because usually I don't answer the question and I wander off here and there. So it's really painful for me to read a transcript of something that I said. Or I've also, hearing my own voice is another thing that I don't like. But when I discovered this one by Stanford, there's a guy that was interviewing me at Stanford. And I think on Wikipedia, it might be the first one on the top of the list of things that are on the Wikipedia page. That one I found out was actually the one I enjoy the most. So that's the one that's, I guess, oral history at Stanford. But if you want to see one that I think is my best little one, it has the tester in it. It has some of this other stuff that wasn't in any of the other interviews. And I was surprised that I actually took that stuff out of my little display case. And I must have driven to Stanford or Palo Alto, I don't know. But that's the one where you can see my little tester, and I have some memorabilia there that this video was taken in the home of the guy that's interviewed. And he had a camera crew there apparently. And I thought it was not that good. But then when I just saw it about a year ago, I thought, wow, that turned out really good. But anyhow, there you have it.
Yeah, I'd like to hit on what these guys went through as, what the chip guys did. They got to be brilliant for a month, right, doing the design, and then they'd spend months with their scales. Don't call them rulers. Their scales on these light tables, and they're measuring all these, if something overlaps something, that's a transistor. And here's an urban story for you, Al. Do you remember Redfield?
Yes, Redfield. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So he came back during my time, and when he walked down the hall, everybody got real quiet, and they said, his Sprite collision logic worked the first time. And that was just like, oh my God, because it was so complicated to hand check all that.
Yep.
So somebody asked in the chat room about what kind of checks, and I was starting to type. We did get DRCs while we were there, design rule checks, which told you if you got too close to something, but we didn't have electrical rule checks that told you if you shorted it together outright. Yeah. And so we had like 7 revs.
You got that after I left.
Right. We got DRCs after you left. Yeah.
It was amazing anything worked. I mean, but I still remember laying the stuff out, like the Vic chip, the original one. I laid it out on the floor, the layout of 4 layers, and it was 12 foot by 12 foot thing. I laid it on the floor and I crawled around on it for weeks.
And I bet I know the pin plotter you used.
You're right.
That old cranky thing.
Yes.
There's that book by Brian Bagnall on this Commodore. Brian Bagnall wrote a book. He had a few editions of it. But anyhow, his first edition, we never talked. But then a later edition, we talked. But one of the things that kind of upset specifically Harry Bauckham, because Chuck is quoted as, I'm the world's greatest layout designer. And Harry would say, well, Bill didn't lay out the chip, I did.
Right.
And Mike James and Sid Holt, they were the mass designers.
Yeah.
But the reason why Chuck said that wasn't as the mass design. My chips always work, but Chuck never really knew why my chips always work. And Bill Hurd, you would say that I don't think his chips ever work, but they did. And the reason why is because I checked them in an interesting way. And what I did was, like, for instance, the PIA, I was spun off of the 6800 microprocessor to do the PIA. I was the only design engineer of the PIA that Wozniak used in his Apple-1. And that particular design, I checked 5 times from beginning to end. And what my rule of thumb was, is I would check it one more time after I didn't find any errors. Previous check. So that means that if I fell asleep during one of the parts of the chip, then I would discover it the next time around, because I didn't think I'd fall asleep at the same time at the same place. But Chuck never knew that I made the
what went into it. Yeah.
To do this. And that's what, when I was the microprocessor design manager at MOS Technology, we followed these rules that we knew we would be successful following. So the mass designers did really good work. They really checked their work. And then when we put the cells together on a big layout, and we could find out whether we had an error between cells or lines on one cell. So we did all of this extra effort. And Will Mathis, we used to call him IBM, because he simulated the instruction decode logic. And we had our own lanes that we worked in, and we did it. We were dedicated to make sure that that thing worked the first time. We didn't spend months after the chip was designed, like Bill Hurd was just saying. We had it all. When we were done, we were done. And we had maybe to make the last check, but we had double checked sections of it. We wanted to make sure when we went to the mask shop, we didn't have a whole lot of things that we had to fix because it wasn't designed properly the first go around. It's worth doing right. I mean, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And that's what that team is dedicated. We all were involved in making that work.
Yeah.
Bill, what was the atom of? Were you designing individual polygons, individual transistors, individual gates? What was the fundamental unit of design at that point?
Well, the transistor.
The size of the transistor.
The layout. So what?
Yeah.
What we
layout,
did.
What did you have to control in layout? The size of the transistor?
Yeah, and so for instance, I picked all the transistor sizes on the chip. That was what I did. So I designed C22 VIA without any use of any computer other than the GDS1 to digitize it. That was the chip that I felt if I could get that to work without any use of any simulation or any computer, that I could start my own design company. And I was planning to start the Western Design Center in Valley Forge I was going to start it on July 4th, 1976.
So it wasn't even a gate, it was transistor by transistor.
It was transistor by transistor, but what you end up doing, I had 5 different size transistors that I used. In the registers, I would use, it wasn't ever the minimum size transistor, but I used what would be considered a minimum size transistor. It was wider than it was
long.
The length. And so you would have a higher speed that way. So what I did was I used all the same transistor sizes in the registers. That meant that when the layout designer laid it out, they would recognize that the transistor wasn't the right size because it was always the same. So when I was using things like the data path control, where you transfer information from a register onto a bus and then transfer it into the next register, all of those transistor sizes I defined as the same. They were higher speed, so they weren't the minimum size. So all of these kinds of things, I organized it so we could have 5 different size inverters, NOR gates, NAND gates, and the NOR gates and NAND gates, if you look at a NAND gate, you have 2 transistors in series to the ground. And so they were twice the width of the smaller ones. So we'd have all the same speed across the whole chip. And then the other thing is, where do you put things on the chip? If you look at where things are placed on the chip, and I would say the Visual 6502, I've never done this, but if you do this and watch the transistors turn on and turn off, you'll see that they were all organized for the minimum path, the minimum data path. So all of this was put into the design. That design, Rod and I, while we're waiting for the first wafers to come out, Rod and I had a nice conversation where he said, boy, if that works the way we think it's going to work, we can go to the happy hunting ground knowing that we did something special with our lives. That was Rod. Rod knew what we were doing was revolutionary. And that's the conversation we had. We also probably had a beer later at lunch. But the point is that Rod and I, because we designed 3 microprocessors before it was the Olivetti 5065 MOS Tech, a different MOS Tech, sold that. The Olivetti CPU had a lot of the features of the 6800. It predates the 6800. In fact, if you find some of the original documentation that the marketing group out of Motorola would send out to their sales team, those original layouts, the pictures, were the 5065 that Rod and I completed. And then the 6800, and then the 6501, and then, of course, the 6502. Chuck didn't want the 6502. Chuck said, well, okay, if you put that in there just so it doesn't have a lower yield. I go, no, it's not going to have a lower yield. It's got like 12 transistors or something like that. You're not even going to see it. It's the same size. Everything's the same size. I'm burying these transistors for the 6502 underneath the metal layer. And so then Chuck, he was off on a sales trip someplace. When he came back, and I said, well, hey, I built the clock generator for the 6501 on, I guess we'll call it the 6502. But his only thing was, as long as it doesn't reduce the yield. But he wasn't the one that said, I want to put the clock generator on the chip. He wasn't familiar with why that was a good idea. He's not a semiconductor engineer, he's a system. And he was a very good systems engineer.
Yeah, Bill, you'd cringe at how many revs it took for us to get a few of the chips working later in life.
Well, yeah, I heard your war stories. It is painful to hear you say that.
I mean,
because,
the VIC chip, we basically, it worked on the second pass. I had one bug in it, and I remember the fact we had to get to CES. And this is a real testament to the manufacturing and mass shop. It came out right before Christmas, and we found one bug in it, okay, that we had to fix. So I fixed, that was the original VIC 2. And so we fixed that, but the mass shop, they all had to work over Christmas because we had to get it to CES in January.
Right.
So literally, I remember handing off the change to Don Payne's group, and they had the mask done in 3 days, and we had the chip done like January 5th or something, right before CES, plugged it in at work, we went to CES. But again, exactly the same kind of process that Bill was describing was the only way you could do it. You had these very fixed structures of what an inverter size was, what a NAND gate size was, and depending on how many you were driving, you would scale that up in increments, digital increments, essentially. And it really allowed you to have a lot more control and simplicity of the design so that you could do it, so it would work out of the chute. You just couldn't do that. You really had to be that disciplined because you didn't have the luxury of a computer.
There's another part of this story that we touched on earlier, and that is the 6502 was never supposed to be a home computer CPU.
Right. I know.
It was supposed to be a controller, a CPU for a controller. And the competition was the Intel 4040 was a 2-chipset processor or controller. And it sold for $29. So if you wonder where the $20 item came in, is because we were originally planning to compete with the 4040 out of Intel, the 4040 chipset. So actually, the other thing that you may not know is that we not only had the 6501, 6502, but the other thing we had at Westcon that year was the 6530 chip. So that's the chip. There are two of them. There are two of them on
built-in ROM,
the Kim 1. And so during the show, we had to update the ROM for the demo unit that Will Mathis was demonstrating, bringing up a 6502 system. That's what we did in the St. Francis Hotel. We sold chips. We gave away chips. No, we sold chips, but not the one. We had probably had chips to eat also. But we had beer, and then we had a demo of bringing up a system. And that was a big deal back in the day. And Will Mathis is the one that did that. Well, we found that apparently he found an error in the ROM code. So we had to turn that during the show. So we had to, I guess they put it on an airplane. This is before FedEx. But they had to send it out, another version of that, because Will Mathis was having problems with his bringing up the system thing. But there's two 6530 chips. That's another chip I designed. So I designed the 22, the 32. The 32 actually.
30 has ROM on it too, right?
Well,
6530 has half K of ROM.
Half K? Yes. No, the 30 had 128 bytes, and the 32.
That's RAM.
Yeah. but no ROM. But the 32 was a 2 chipset that was used in the Atari game. And so it was the 6502 plus the 32 chip was the Atari game. And then the 6530 chip had ROM on it, and it had 64 bytes of RAM. So that KIM-1 had 2 of those, one for the teletype interface, and the other one was the keypad interface that's built into the KIM-1. That's those 2 chips. And so they had 2 different ROM codes in it. But anyhow, this is part of the history of what we needed to do to get the 6502 accepted in the industry. And it was a 2 chip set. The 65, well, what became the 6502, Chuck would have thought it was the 6501 plus the 6530 chip. That's what we committed to do when we left Motorola. 2 chips. We needed to have them both.
I've got a chip not working story for you. This one for Al, you probably know Bruce Ahearns. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So my first week second week at MOS, they were working on the TED chip, and he turns on the microscope light and then turns it off again while he's probing. And what it was, we were doing both NTSC mode and PAL mode in the same chip, and we had it metal to metal short. They couldn't talk to the register, and he used the microscope light to flip the register bit so he could keep probing. And I was like, I am working in the right place. This is where I want to work.
Yeah, I remember those micro probes and micrometers. Obviously, you can't do that today with the geometries. But yeah, that's what you did. That's how I found the bug in the original VIC chip before, in the one bug we had. You just micro probed it like an oscilloscope. Yeah. And,
Bill, did you micro probe in your day? Actually probe the chip under a microscope?
Yeah, and in fact, I have one of those micro manipulators, they were called. I have one of those in my little lab. But I wanted to say something else about the 6501/6502. Some people would say that there was an error in the 6501/6502 when it was first introduced. And that error, they said,
ROR?
Right. The ROR instruction didn't work. And what's interesting is that look at the programming card for the original 6501, you will not find the ROR instruction in there. It was not intended to be on the chip. And I think Chuck was talking to somebody and said, hey, we need to add ROR. And so the actual cut and paste, you can see if you get a copy of the next programming card, you can see where it doesn't quite line up with the other instructions in there. And that's because ROR was added afterwards. So we could figure out how to put ROR in because we already had the instructions. We had basically the logic. We just had to put in some of the decode logic in and fit that in where we could put it in. But yeah, that wasn't a mistake. It was a mistake by Chuck, not including it.
Right.
Last question.
Go for
I have some questions. I do have some questions. Before I ask my question, I want to state again how amazing it is that we were able to do this. These are some amazing people. That chip, the 6502, we've come to see as transformative. It really did change the world. That there is even, the idea that you could sell, it's the Apple-1. Right? You could sell an Apple-1 that carried a 6502 and you could sell it for $1 million. You've seen some of the sale prices, right? This is really quite remarkable. You would never have thought that something you invented would go for that. Now they're talking about NFT, right? Selling the NFT. Dan Kottke is going to talk a little bit about that. So I want to talk a little bit about the valuation changes that come from any and every board on any of these machines, the KIM, the Rockwell machine, any of the 6502 chip bearing boards as a result of today's announcement by Achim Bach, because it's not just that an Apple board that now has his signature on it will rise in valuation. And that's a question I have. What would you forecast the change in valuations would be? But this will have a trickle down effect to all of that era of that chip. That chip really permeates that. They say the chip that changed the world. It's a nice crossing the chasm kind of a chip, I would say. So I threw out a lot of stuff. I invite you all to make some statement about it. Go ahead, anybody. Maybe Dan, let me focus on you because you've got some Apple-1 boards, and you talked about NFTs and valuations, and what does this mean to you? How do you measure this?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, thank you, Daniel.
I missed part of your question because
that's all right, but Achim I think he's digesting it. So it's valuation enhancement of historic objects, right? We're the Comp Museum, right? We're talking about historic objects. There's an array of 6502 bearing boards out there that all got their valuations increased today because of this announcement that Achim gave. Everybody's going to be looking for their old machines and where are they? They have a signature. But even if it didn't have a signature now, it's probably worth more anyway, right?
I'm planning to put signatures on all my Apple-1 replicas.
You just have to find out the chemical formula of how it was written, right?
I don't think Sharpies were invented yet, but I can tell you Steve Jobs was very fond of the Pilot micro-writer felt pens. He used those all the time.
All right, good. Now tell us about NFTs and what you were talking about earlier. Non-fungible tokens.
Well, the word NFT is used in many contexts, but in the world of artifacts, it's hugely valuable in a very common sense way because it gives you a provenance that can't be corrupted. That's all. I mean,
so how about an NFT regarding any 6502 bearing board? Is there merit to this?
Well, there's the merit to using NFT blockchain for any artifact, any kind of antique, anything that has a provenance. You want to know who owned it before you and how much it was worth, that kind of thing. That's that's a wonderful technology. But what most people hear about NFTs is just digital graphics, and that's a fad.
Okay, so Achim, does what I'm saying resonate with you in any way? You have a registry, which is like it's a blockchain registry of NFTs. Does any of that make any sense? Am I groping at straws here?
Sorry, you mean NFTs for Apple-1? Yeah.
Well, not only just Apple-1s, but certainly for Apple-1s. But I'm saying NFTs for 6502 bearing boards and machines.
Yeah, we have seen quite a lot of NFTs right now, and I only know about NFTs for Apple-1 with the 6502, but not for the 6502 itself. So, but that's a good idea to have it. Yeah.
Did Corey talk about my son's company, which is doing NFTs, art NFTs already?
Liza Loop, go ahead, speak up.
My son has a company which is creating its own currency and doing NFTs we'll do my Apple-1 and probably others if other people want it. And he just changed the company name, so I'm madly scrambling to look for the new company name. But we are talking about possibly auctioning off the Apple-1 the first Apple one with a base price of $50 million. So I hope it doesn't sell. But yes, I just can't.
All right, so I'm opening the floor to questions because this has to do with assets in museums, right? We're talking about asset and curation and provenance, and NFTs are a form of provenance. I'm not an expert in any of this, but we are not going to live forever. Everybody on the screen isn't going to be around for 50 years from now, for example. And will NFTs be, museum ready and museum artifacts and so on? And is it now that the 6502, we'll call it the layer or the revolution, could have a provenance associated with NFTs?
The answer is yes.
And how do you foresee that happening? How do you foresee that playing out?
Well, somebody has to build the artifact, and that is the NFT, and then you have to sell it. So I tried to get Jonah to come onto this call. My son is Jonah Loop, and that's the business that he's gone into. He's been a movie producer for 25 years, and it knows all aspects of that kind of the business.
Right. Fine. Daniel, can you say anything about that?
Wait, what was the question?
Well, the question is, how would you encapsulate something into an NFT that had value and that and specifically an Apple board or a 6502 chip machine?
Okay, well, in the world of artifacts, I helped a number of early Apple people sell artifacts that they had, and I would sometimes write a letter for them, a letter of authentication, and that's just a piece of data. And so in the world of artifacts, you want all that information attached in an uncorruptible way, and that's what we use the blockchain for.
That's good. Joachim, can you comment on this?
Yeah. So in the past, we have seen just some digital pictures, and then later we saw real world things like a computer as an NFT. So it is the future, and many people like to have just a part of an Apple-1. So there's one company right now that offers NFT shares of an Apple-1. So I guess I have to put all the information from Liza on a web page about her son, so other Apple-1 owner can contact her and have an NFT for the Apple-1. And maybe it's even interesting for myself.
Where I could see something interesting, sorry, Liza, is if with taking, when you think about it, the NFT, it's really establishing that information is not reproducible. You can't really copy it. So it's establishing the originality of information. So I think when we're looking at artifacts, the NFT would be the documentation that would go along with that artifact to establish provenance, to make sure that the documentation is not altered in the future, so that the conditions can be established of this was the condition on such and such a date of this particular artifact, and so it can be compared. Another thing an NFT could be useful for is authenticating that an artifact is still the artifact, right? Now, I don't see this really in the Apple-1 world, but in the art world in general, making sure that, for example, the painting that someone has loaned to a museum is the same painting that is returned when the loan is complete. And there are companies that do very high resolution scans of artifacts, and they do them with sort of a 3D type of a camera that really gets all the details to establish condition. And that put into an NFT would be something that would, from a museum perspective, really just protect everyone all around from the liability that something changed, right? That something, someone damaged something, or God forbid, something has been swapped out in the middle of the night with a very good forgery. For the Apple-1, I think, NFTs of the Apple-1 of specific, for example, Liza's is documented as the first one the first product that was ever, an item that was ever sold by Apple Computer. So, it was sold to Woz, who then gave it to the Loop Foundation. An NFT of that specific board, like a high resolution scan or something else, would be something where, someone could own a piece of that or own the actual, scan of it without having the physical artifact. So it kind of allows sharing of those details as well to someone who, maybe they can't have access to the Apple-1 itself, but maybe to the digital artifact representing it.
Corey, thank you for that. That was very succinct. I invite anybody else who would like to comment. This is an unfolding topic, right? The whole world is trying to zoom in on this. Howard Perlmutter, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to add that the big Achilles heel in current NFTs is in the provenance between the physical world and the blockchain world. And you need what's called an oracle that is able to prove that what's in the physical world is what the blockchain is referring to. And you can't really fundamentally say that a painting is the same object that is being referred to by this NFT without human institutional participation. In other words, you need a firm with a reputation to vouch that the painting that was lent out is the one that comes back, possibly through the high resolution scans or maybe 3D scans. The problem with the current fad of NFTs is that people can just grab any graphic off of the web and say it's their own and mint an NFT around those pixels. What is missing as far as digital software and data artifacts is one thing, and what's missing as far as computer hardware artifacts is another thing. The thing about a computer that is different from a painting is that it has a digital fingerprint potentially that a painting could never have. And what I think is interesting about NFTs in the context of this conversation here today about the 6502 is that many of these machines maybe will boot up. But even if they don't boot up, every single machine at some level beneath the digital level has a uniqueness to it that can be fingerprinted at the analog level beneath the digital level. In other words, if you hook up an oscilloscope to certain places in your board and you pump signals into other places in your board, two boards that were manufactured of the same product will at a high level be the same, but at a deeper level will not be the same because they are two physically different circuits. And the people who are here today that I heard speaking who invented the chips are actually the right people to consult, because this is actually the thing you want. You want to actually know that this particular circuit board is not only model number 1, but it's serial number 7. And that had a particular signature, a fingerprinting signature. Now, this is more difficult for machines which don't boot up, but even a machine that doesn't boot up, you could find certain points that you'd hook your lead, your probes to on the circuit board, and other points where you feed in a standardized signal, and then you would then record that data and you put it on the blockchain. You put the hash of it on the blockchain. And that would forevermore say that if you want to claim to be that board, you better be able to reproduce this signal. And
there's one
would,
challenge to, sorry, there's one challenge to that. I'm sorry to interrupt. And I think Bill Hurd is probably one of the experts on this because he's talked about this in the past. There's one challenge to that problem with electronics, non-digital electronics, or even I guess digital electronics, is the fact that these systems actually are not static. Over time, things age, and they do actually change underneath the covers from an analog perspective. So I think until we have a large set where we could sort of put together some sort of machine learning to calculate out the decay or the change over time to compare to the blockchain, it would be difficult. But I do understand theoretically what you're saying is correct. But then the challenge of what happens is many of the components that you'd be measuring against do have a half-life that can also reset itself at times based upon conditions, and how things are stored also change how that analog stuff is. When they came off the line, you're 100% correct. Like you could, for a period of time, you could know, if they visually look the same, externally, you could do this sort of analog test. But when we're looking at objects that are 35, 40, 50 years old, that's where the decay is. And that's, where you're not able to do that because they do keep decaying. And one of the challenges I have when I power on an Apple-1 that hasn't been turned on in 40 years is some of the things I have to sort of reset. And luckily, there's been a lot of research done by the U.S. military to keep some very old aircraft flying where some of the electronics need to be sort of refurbished, where they don't actually have replacements, has provided lots of scientific papers on how to do that. But that's why things are not static, because some of those processes can be done in the middle. If a machine's turned on that hasn't been turned on in 5 years, things start changing in that analog level. So there's a lot of variance there. But you're right if they were new, and obviously more modern stuff is static.
Corey, Corey, I'd just like to respond to what you said. You're absolutely right. When you go down deeper to, beneath the digital level, deeper into the analog, you get worse and worse decay. Absolutely, I agree with you. And what that means is that the challenge gets larger and larger, and the amount of data that you've got to collect gets larger, and the amount that you've got to notarize onto a blockchain gets larger. But this turns into actually what could become a digital archaeology profession, where you have, although the profile of a machine after it's 10 years old versus when it's 50 years old is going to change, the research to be done is to figure out what personality continues over time. Just like a human being is different 50 years later, but then there's certain things that are going to be the same, and how it differentiates between different stages of life of a particular instance of a product versus other instances of that product. And so I agree, you've raised an important point. They could, if the economics of the blockchain continue to rise exponentially, could eventually be justified. But there's another point I'm going to make, because I'm more of a software guy and most of the people here are hardware people, but I coined a phrase decades ago that hardware is out and software is in. And what you've just said is you've really put some meat to the bones of that, because the decay that you'd have in hardware that you're trying to tokenize, that hardware is changing in ways that the tokenization might not be able to provide accurate provenance. But with software, the bits are the bits. You can notarize a hash of the bits, and those bits will be the same decades, centuries later. And therefore, if you notarize your software bits when you create them and get it onto the blockchain, not by taking somebody else's artwork off the web, but actually during the process of creating the bits and creating the pixels, then there's the possibility of NFTs really working. But as several people have already said, including Daniel, that the current crop of NFTs are a fad and not a rather risky investment, because people can take other people's artwork and claim it's their own and create an NFT around it, or really bad digital artists who have no idea what we've been up to in the digital graphics world over the last 40, 50 years are coming out with all kinds of stuff that they're turning into NFTs, and those are not going to hold value once it's realized that it's just not good art. Won't stand the test of centuries.
So what you're saying is my Banksy NFT is not going to be worth anything. Lovely.
That's the thing
How about this idea? CompUseum only has NFTs of computers in its museum.
That a museum can play an important role with provenance, right?
Sorry, who would want to go into a museum that only has NFTs?
It's all online. You study all the computers that you see in the NFTs, and you look at the provenance, and it's one of a kind.
Yeah, I download the picture and then.
Well, I guess there's probably a picture, right? It's probably part of the NFT, right? I mean, doesn't an NFT have a lot of stuff packed into it?
It could. It depends on how it was written, the smart contracts behind it. But the thing is, if you've got a museum with physical artifacts,
yeah,
you're a kind of like a Fort Knox holding gold, right? Yeah. In other words, if the NFT is backed by something physically secured, then the NFT or shares in the NFT could potentially be traded on a secondary market while the artifact stays in the museum.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we've been speculating. We're coming to the end of our time. It's a lot of food for thought. I am not going to shut down the meeting right at 6, but pretty close to it. I do know my family will want me shortly for dinner, but that's irrelevant because I've seen folks come in from Australia who were having breakfast. I see lots of our European people would want to go to sleep, right? Isn't it? It's, what is it there? It's midnight. Cedric, it's midnight, right?
Yes.
Holger, it's midnight. Oh my
2
God.
minutes. 2 minutes until
2 minutes. Yeah. That's right.
Hey, Jim, can I jump in on something?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
I wanted to thank Bill Mensch. You gave me a career. You know, thank you so much. My life changed because of you. And I have people tell me that, so it all comes down to you.
I agree. He's kicking around the floor.
Thank you very much.
How about if we give the last time to Bill Mensch? Go ahead.
You're asking me to make a statement?
Well, whatever you want. Whatever you want to do.
Well, it's my pleasure. You know, my life associated with the 6502 or 65XX technology is a life of empowering others to do what they want to do. And Chuck coming to me, he wanted a microprocessor that he could do some system stuff with. Wozniak came, he wanted to build his Apple-1, Apple-2. And, my life has been a wonderful experience because of others that chose to use the 6502 or one of the variants of it to do what they wanted to do. And so I never wanted to go public. Although I was asked to go public, I didn't do that. And I didn't create a 32-bit because if you look at the 32-bit world, even today, you have like RISC-V coming out and a lot of people getting behind it. So staying with the 6502, 65C02, 65816 has been a joy. And it's because of people like you that built systems out of them that you enjoy working with, just owning, collecting, whatever you do with them. It's because of others that's possible. And so I was just wanting to enable. And Bill, when we first met, I said I was an enabler. and so, yeah, that's me. And I know what that means in different contexts, but at the same time, enabling others to do what they want to do is just one of the things that I love doing and I continue to love doing. And when people come to me that want to use my RTL to build plastic versions of that, and then want to announce it, that's a gift to me. And so just hanging out with you guys today is a gift. And I appreciate your comments there, Bill, and others that have made comments. I do appreciate that. And I want to tell you that it's your interest that increases the joy that I feel about my being able to, Chuck invited me to do this. Chuck wanted to do this. And so then I think, well, I'll work with Chuck and let's see where we go with that. And then, I was part of the team recruiting the other players that were on that original team. And that video that Jennifer put together is just adorable. And she's just done something wonderful there. And in celebration of her father's work. And so, and also celebrating the other people that didn't get as much time on the screen, so to speak, as I have and Chuck has had. Now, Chuck is no longer with us. A lot of those people that helped make it happen aren't with us anymore. And I'm a lucky one.
So, very cool.
Very, very cool. I'm not quite sure how you add to all of that.
Thank you, Bill.
How about another round of applause for Bill, because really he helped me and all of us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I'm going to come bring this to a day crescendo and a close about 30 seconds from now. And so I want you to know, again, how much I appreciate it. I am thinking about having a Zoom call on the day, which is the 15th, which is Tuesday. If you're interested, be sure that your email address is in my inbox somehow, some way. I think I have everybody's email, but I put it in the chat box today that my email is info@compuseum.org. Most of you get my monthly notices for Compuseum. We will have another celebration of the 6502. I do see around the world that other people will celebrate. This isn't something that's just us. Anybody can celebrate computers. Earth Day is celebrated all over the world. We're looking for global network ambassadors in every country of the world. There are 200 United Nations countries. We would like to have one global network ambassador for World Computer Day in every country. They will help spread the news and spread the word and help us celebrate together the transformative values of computing and all the people who make it happen. So thank you so much for being a participant. And I'm going to say goodbye and sayonara for today. Happy World Computer Day.
All right, thank you. See you later.